Hey Polymaths! Today I'm sitting down with Seth Garrett, a philosophy YouTuber and blogger. Seth has a bachelor's in accounting and a master's in software engineering, but as he describes it, a confluence of health problems challenged him to find meaning in life that would justify the pain of existence. He realized that philosophy was the ultimate solution in this regard. Also an autodidact philosopher, Seth now mixes the detailed constructive logic gained during his time as a software engineer with the more balanced and broad-spanning approaches of an accountant trying to balance all the variables. His unique perspective has resulted in the development of many original philosophic theories in the realm of morality, metaphysics, consciousness, and much more. In this conversation, we touch on philosophy of mind, determinism and free will, ethics, and the utility of debate versus discussion. We also review some of John Vervaeke's terms, such as relevance realization, dialectic into dialogos, and sophrosyne. That being said, without further ado, I give you Seth Garrett.
Okay, so we were just talking a little bit about moral philosophy and pragmatics and ethics, and trying to look at how people are discussing this in the public space. So one thing I'm noticing recently is that a lot of podcast interviews, as well as public lectures and discussions on deep philosophical matters and ethics, there's too much metaphor used. A lot of times there's a lot of theory and lots of discussion, but not a whole lot of pragmatics, not a lot of actionable steps that could be taken. And so this is one thing I want to do with this podcast going forward, is try to find some kind of synthesis and agreed upon, if not just agreed upon terms, agreed upon ideas that we can possibly put into action going forward. So the image is something like multiple scientists working at a chalkboard like we used to see in the early days of Einsteinian mathematics. So that being said, what do you, Seth, believe to be an actionable step that we can take when it comes to ethical philosophy? It's kind of a big question.
You're opening up a huge can of worms, and it's such an important question because, philosophy, it can become really esoteric. It can go very abstract. It can go very deep. Like, people are creating these thought experiments, alternate worlds, all these crazy hypotheses. Like, how does that relate to me, right? When we're thinking about wisdom, we're thinking about, how does this function in my life? How do I navigate my life? And how do we navigate society? How do we do things that are good? Those are the practical questions that you want philosophy to give you. And I think the problem is reality is super complex. And okay, how deductions work in logic, right? You've got premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is, behind every premise is another argument. So it's premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. It's actually, people are going to argue about the premises, and it's going to be, actually, there's premise A and premise B that lead to premise 1. There's premise D and E that lead to premise 2. And then we argue about premise A, and we keep going backwards, right? It's what's behind that? It's I disagree with what's behind that. Well, what's behind that? I disagree about. And that's where we go. So applied ethics is, what do we do? And then we go back to normative ethics. It's are we operating based on deontology to figure out what to do? Are we operating based on utilitarianism to figure out what to do? We disagree about that. Then we have to go back even further to meta-ethics. It's what are we even talking about? What is morality in the first place? And so we go so deep that we get lost, and we don't know how to bring that back up to the surface and make it relevant. It's just a huge exploration. It's easy to get lost in and tangled in weeds.
Yeah, and it seems like there's kind of, at some point, the pick your favorite philosopher effect, or pick your favorite ethical philosophy, because what we're dealing with is a matter of scales. And when you get to the scale of 8 billion people, you're kind of forced into one of these generalized terms. You're forced into virtue ethics or deontology, or anything that any of these major categories that the philosophers have been examining over the ages. And it's hard to really think completely originally. It's impossible, as I understand it, but to really think objectively and not conform to any kind of ethical framework that's not already been established is also a very, very difficult task. But that's kind of what we need, because, like Heraclitus said, the man never steps in the same river twice. It's not the same river, and he's not the same man. that fact. That's a big part of this podcast as well, is examining just how seriously we need to take that statement, because is it saying that like that we're on a upward path of change and reality is always changing, or is it going like this, like exponential? And what parts of society are pushing that to be more exponential, such as technology or the complexity of language and the evolution of language? Does that kind of get ahead of us, is what I'm kind of getting at with that. So that's a whole topic. I wanted to ask, do you have any models? I remember you're presenting some.
Some ethical opinions on some ethical paradigms.
Yes. So you had these kind of moral compass comparisons where you had, here's deontology, here's virtue ethics, here's this and this. That was very revealing.
So this is kind of what we're talking about. We're going back a layer. So when we're applied ethics, I mean, when you're trying to figure out what to do, you have to apply a normative ethical theory, right? And so you have to pick one of these theories and apply it to a problem to figure out what you're supposed to do, right? And so I kind of built some diagrams of different theories and kind of graded them as to their quality, right? And so these I'm grading as low in philosophic quality. And so I'll just introduce these real quick and we can talk about them. So natural law theory, it's kind of these first two, they're both religious theories of ethics, and they go back to Euthyphro's dilemma. And so, Socrates in his dialectics with, the people of his, neighbors, he bumped into this guy named Euthyphro, and he had this conversation about ethics. And Euthyphro, he was talking about like the gods, the Greek gods, and they like piety, right? So piety, it's kind of like a word that means doing the thing that the gods like, being good for the gods. And so
pious.
Being pious to the Greek gods. And so Socrates is challenging Euthyphro about what it means to be pious. He's like, is being pious good because the gods like it, or is being pious good in and of itself, right? So is the thing naturally good, or is it good because of someone's opinion? The Greek gods have an opinion about that thing. And so this presents us with kind of a trolley problem or a dilemma. It's like, which side are we going to take? So, you can think about this in any religious paradigm, right? So like for Abrahamic religions, you've got Moses and the 10 Commandments. It's like, thou shalt not kill, right? Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not lie. Is that good? Is it good to do those things in and of itself? Or is it good because God has a favorable opinion? And that's where we get this dichotomy here. Natural law says that there are natural rules built into the structure of reality. So it's like if you take a microscope and you zoom in on the laws of physics, at the bottom of reality, it's like, thou shalt not lie is written into the laws of reality. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. It's somehow in the laws of physics. So that's one way to do it. The other way is divine command theory, which is like, it's just divine opinion. If God says do it, you do it. That's the definition of goodness, is God's opinion, right?
Right. But God is subjective, so we never agree on that.
Exactly. Yeah, this divine command theory, it's just subjectivity. It's like, well, God could have any opinion. He can flip-flop his opinion. That's super arbitrary. That's not very helpful, right?
So it seems to be, not to interrupt, but it seems like most of the moral structures that we thought up to explain what we thought that God would be opposed to are very much tied to the insular cortex, and that which we find disgusting or frightening. So, for instance, epileptic seizure would be considered the work of a demon or the person's possessed instead of looking for medical explanation.
Absolutely. Like, one interesting thing about ancient religions is often there's these purity cultures where it's like, hey, we have to wash, we have to be clean. There's rituals for baptism is a purity ritual, right? That's like, it's kind of the disgust syndrome is in response to impurity.
I remember feeling that feeling after I was baptized. I was about like 12 or 13 or so, yeah.
Oh yeah, feeling
crazy.
Cleansed.
Yeah, I actually remember feeling lighter as I walked out of the church. I felt like I was kind of like walking lighter, like my body was lighter. Yeah. I also had that feeling after Reiki treatments.
Reiki, interesting. Yeah. Well, Robert Sapolsky says some interesting things. He says that the cleanliness circuit in our brains is like basically the same thing as our guilt circuit. And so when you feel guilty for something, that's like very analogous to feeling unclean. And so like the baptism ritual, it massages the part of the brain that has guilt because it's the same thing as unclean, right?
It's interesting, like I'm sure you've heard the term the body keeps the score. That's one instance where I think that term is actually quite applicable because you can add up guilt, like you can have you feel guilty for this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, and it kind of compounds, and then you feel a lot of relief when you find that there is a God that will forgive you for everything. You don't have to do anything to really deserve that forgiveness, but that's another discussion. You can
right,
if you like.
Right. Yeah, man. So yeah, I think that the subjectivity of this divine command theory, it's just super arbitrary. This natural law theory, it's like, really, there's like a moral substance in the universe. Like there's like no evidence for that. It sounds kind of wacky. And then these two are more atheistic moral paradigms. Hedonism, it's the belief that just like morality is based on pleasure, maximize pleasure. And, like there's kind of an intelligent way to interpret hedonism, but there's also an unintelligent way. So like pleasure is often interpreted as the short-term good thing, right? So like drugs, getting addicted to drugs, that's stereotypical hedonism.
Right.
And most people would say, yeah, the right thing is not to go do drugs all the time. That's not the moral thing. So hedonism is wrong if that's the conclusion. Right?
I like to distinguish these as wanton hedonism versus ethical hedonism. We can talk about that more later. Yeah. Existentialism fits into the ethical hedonism.
Right. There's ways to complexify hedonism to make it more reasonable, for sure. Right. Ethical egoism, same thing. There's kind of like a very different ways to simplify it versus complexify it. But like one way to think about ethical egoism is that morality is just based on focusing on your own self-interest, right? And so, morality has nothing to do with the collective. It's just dog eat dog, evolutionary battle for success. I do what's good for me. It's very Machiavellian, narcissistic, solipsistic. It's you're the main character, do the thing that you want to do, right? So most people would say that's not what we mean when we're talking about morality. We're talking about this collective thing, not this individual thing, right? So,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say Robert Greene has some work on Machiavelli as well. He says a lot of people misunderstand him. And he kind of promotes a lot of his philosophy, so I'm very new to reinterpreting Machiavelli in that way, but I definitely agree with what you're talking about, though. It's quite a paradigm.
Right. Yeah, and like with this ethical egoism, I want to make a distinction. There's some, how do I put this? There's a lot of logic to looking at morality through this lens at like a very reductive level. So reduction is like the building blocks. Emergence is like the final product. So like I think that thinking about ethical egoism is useful, but I don't think it's good enough as an endpoint. You got to build up to something more complex.
I think like the best way to look at that is kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or what he called self-actualization, looking at a healthy way to actualize upon your best self and all that.
Yeah.
And you can do that
So-
in a very selfish way, and that's where that philosophy becomes too overly individualistic and all that.
Right. So, like Nietzsche, he talked about something, he kind of advocated a type of ethical egoism, which I think it's useful to keep this perspective in mind, right? So, Nietzsche was basically, in Human, All Too Human, he was talking about something to the effect of, like, when people do good deeds, right, the mother cares for the child to the sacrifice of her well-being, sacrificing sleep, getting physically damaged by pregnancy, She's like kind of being a hero to take care of this child. And the soldier, he goes to war and defends his people. He's being a hero, sacrificing his own well-being, right? Nietzsche, he says something to the effect of, all selfless behavior is actually selfish, because the soldier, he wants to go do the heroic thing. The mother wants to do the motherly thing, because why else? Why would they do it? Why else would they be doing it if they're doing it because they want to do it, right?
Yeah. I don't know if I buy that logic, yeah. Because you could just be following a belief system, and then you're compelled to do it, or you're more so compelled by belief structure to do it.
Right, and then it goes into how are you interpreting the word want? So it's like, well, you're maximizing your benefit. Like if you've got a gun to your head and say go be a soldier or die, it's like, well, being a soldier maximizes my benefits better than dying, so I'm going to be selfish and maximize my benefits to go be a soldier. You know what I mean? So even compulsion, you can interpret it into selfishness, right?
Right. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So there's a way to interpret this. It's kind of a powerful paradigm to keep in mind, but it doesn't. I don't think it fully explains it in a simplistic way. Okay, so now we have level 1. Okay, these are, in my opinion, you can use these you can think about these as the building blocks of morality, right? These are very useful as building blocks. They are not good as destinations. Like you should not say, I am a deontologist, right? Because that means you think that deontology is complete enough to operate on, and in my opinion, none of these are complete enough, right?
Right.
So basically, virtue ethics, it's the idea that virtue, to be good is to be virtuous, and to be virtuous is to act out the virtues. And so it's like Pokemon with virtues. It's like you gotta go collect your courage, and go collect your humility, and go collect your charity, and you're collecting all the virtues. And Aristotle, he built a tripolar paradigm where you got to navigate between there's the excesses, which is too much of a virtue. You gotta not do the deficiencies, which is too little of a virtue. You gotta get the right proportion, and it's basically like being a good person. That's the solution to life, right? The solution to life is being virtuous. The problem with virtue ethics is it doesn't tell you what to do, right? Like you open this
virtues.
Right. Okay. So courage is an example of a virtue, right? So you open this up with how do we apply this to our lives, right? How do we guide our lives to do what are we supposed to do? Okay. So Aristotle says, "Hey, Patrick, go be courageous," right? So you've got a trolley problem. What does it mean? How do you address a trolley problem with courage, right? It's ambiguous. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do, right?
Right. That's where you have to bring in utilitarianism. For the trolley problem is most involved in utilitarianism, vice versa.
Yes.
So
okay.
Before, I don't want to keep interrupting you, but
you're good.
I had a question about virtue. So there's also this whole idea of being respectable and dutiful and honorable for adhering to a set of virtues and values. And well-examined, updated virtues and values, I guess, that you would see more so in a democracy. So an example that I've recently seen, I've been watching Star Trek. Deep Space Nine is very much focused on, or at least one of the major character arcs is Quark the Ferengi, and he has an ideology / virtue ethic of capitalism. Basically, his whole species is a capitalist species. That's how they operate socially, and they even talk about like denigrating women and how that's like they explore the limitations of respecting their beliefs as a species for how they think of women, because so there's lots of interesting proposals there. Like, I don't like I very much am opposed to the large majority of what I see of what capitalism has brought about, and Star Trek kind of tries to show how there can be virtues and things to be respected within that, but also it can be contended. Is that a way to think of virtue ethics as well? Like he had to be specific, he had like the 230 some rules of acquisition was the that was their code of conduct, was the rules of acquisition.
Yeah, I think when you bring in rules, I think that's when you kind of get to deontology.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Right.
But there's interesting crossover, I guess, there between like virtues versus rules.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like you can systematize a virtue and then it becomes a deontology. Like honesty is a virtue, and then like systematize honesty. It's like under these circumstances, no false witnesses, but it's okay to do a white lie. Right? And you got rules.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, I see what you mean.
Right. So that leads us right into deontology, which is duty-based morality, and the duties. It's a duty to follow a rule, and so rules are kind of like hard lines in the sand, like thou shalt not go beyond this line, right? And it's kind of absolutist morality. It's like thou shalt not lie. You know, Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, he invented deontology basically, and he was such an absolutist about thou shalt not lie. He basically said, like, if the truth shall kill him, let him die. And like that sounds pretty extreme in and of itself, but the context is even more extreme, right? Like Kant was saying, like, if a murderer like knocks on your door and you open the door and the murderer is like, hey, I want to kill your brother, where's your brother? Like Kant was saying, you have a duty to tell him the truth where your brother is, even at like, I don't care about the consequences. Like maybe your brother's gonna die, you still have a duty to tell the truth. Consequences don't absolve you of your duty. You know what I mean?
Right. That's why I think it's always context dependent. Whichever ethical system aligns with being able to adhere to the particular situation that you're in, and then trying to apply good virtues to that in the moment. So maybe that's more like ethics of care, or the way that Sam Harris gets at this a lot, because you can have like 1,000 different ways of interpreting gun culture and gun rules, but if somebody breaks into your house, you want to be able to do something about that.
Yeah. So, ethics of care, I view it as very similar to virtue ethics. Like, I kind of view ethics of care as basically, it's basically saying to do the good thing is to embody the virtue of care, of being caring. Caring is a virtue. And so as long as you embody the caring virtue, that's the correct path to morality. But it falls into the same pitfall, which is, what does it mean to be caring? It's kind of vague. How do we interpret this, right? If your child is crying because they want the toy, do you just satisfy their immediate gratification? Do you just, spoil them? Or do you withhold gratification, develop, moral character? It's long-term, short-term. What does it mean to be caring? It's kind of vague, you know what I mean?
Right. I had a piece I wrote a couple years ago on the difference between attention and care. And I still don't really know how to think about that, because your ability to direct your attention is bound by metabolic efficiency and all the deterministic Sapolsky style of factors that came beforehand. So if you're very well fed, very well rested, very physically fit and all that, and you had a good day, you're feeling good, you're probably going to be able to direct your attention better and appear more caring and be more caring by most people's definition of care in those cases, whereas you may not in other cases. And then people will say you're not being caring enough, but really you're just tired and all these other factors.
Yeah, you're being a bad person, right? That's kind of a clue about what we mean by morality, right?
Right.
It's like,
that's when you go to like borrow from these different rules or different ethics and some kind of structure to keep you aligned, to keep your psyche structurally sound, and to keep your whole moral compass well guided when you're in your worst states like that.
Right. Trying to hedge against the pitfalls of neuroscience. When you dip into those bad states, you gotta hedge yourself against the problems that it can bring.
Right, and I like to think that we just don't know how that works in neuroscience just yet, because that's so complex. Like adherence to an ideology, or where does that appear in the default mode network? You know what I mean? So we don't understand that very well just yet, but we do understand what happens when the brain goes awry, and when certain neurochemistry starts dysfunctioning. Or at least we have lots of theories about what happens with that. Having mental health is like half the battle for sure. But yeah, then we get to just utilitarianism here, which is basically its pros and cons. It's mathematical consequentialism. It's basically saying the good thing is the thing that gives you the best net benefit, the best consequence, right? So we calculate, we have two options. Which option gives us a bigger benefit, right? That's what morality is. And, some people like that approach, some people dislike it. It seems kind of shady to just, it's very capitalistic. It's like, oh, if I'm getting a profit, that's the good thing. It's like, wait a second, did we calculate that correctly? You know what I mean? The ends justify the means. That's where that becomes...
Yes. That's well said, yeah. Deontology rejects that ends justifies the means, whereas utilitarianism embraces it. So I view deontology and utilitarianism as much more applicable, as in they are easier to apply to your life, right? These two are harder to apply, but they're all kind of useful paradigms.
Right. I want to look up the etymology of deontology, actually. I used to know it. I keep forgetting it. Yeah, I think it tricks you because it has ontology in it, but I don't think it's not related to ontology. It's from the Greek being needed or necessary. Or duty and logos for science.
Oh, yeah, that sounds right. Duty and logos.
Ethics
I like
and
that.
action. It's ethics as an action is considered morally good because of some characteristic of the action itself, not because the product of the action is good. So that is quite the opposite of utilitarianism.
Right. It's basically defining the means as good or bad, rather than defining it in terms of the ends.
Right.
Actually, we can talk a little bit more about deontology and utilitarianism. Maybe I should bring up a different. Let me pull something up. Well-being is okay. Let me switch. Share. Stop screen. Present. Share. Okay, this is from my blog. I talk about some of the pitfalls of these in my blog on why meta well-being is good. Okay, so basically I talk about the concept of breaking a moral theory, right? So what does it mean to break a moral theory? So basically what it means is you challenge the theory such that it violates your moral intuitions. So trolley problems are very useful for breaking a moral theory. So you can see here, this is the trolley problem. You can see this image, correct?
Oh, sorry. You have to add it. Okay. There you are.
Can you see
You're
it?
good. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so the default track, right? The default track is 5 people are going to die, right? So if you do nothing, 5 people die. If you pull the lever, then 1 person dies and you save the 5. So utilitarianism, they have the perspective that you're supposed to get the good consequence, right? So you have the good thing, the good action is to get the good consequence. So you've got 2 possible consequences, 1 death versus 5 deaths. So the utilitarian says, pull the lever and we're going to get the net benefit, or we're minimizing the cost, right? We're doing the best consequence, which is 1 death. So utilitarianism says, do it, pull the lever. But deontology says, I have a duty to not kill. Thou shalt not kill. I don't care what the consequences are. Thou shalt not kill. Pulling the lever is murder. You have a duty to not murder. Therefore, let the 5 die, right?
Yes.
So that's why it tests, do you have a deontological bias or do you have a utilitarian bias? What do we do, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Now this image right here, this is how you break deontology, right? So deontology says, well, I have a duty to not kill. Well, what if your inaction kills everyone,
Yeah,
right?
Great depiction.
Right. So if we're going to put everyone on the planet, it's like, really? You're going to let the entire planet get destroyed because thou shalt not pull the lever. It's like, really, man? Come on, pull the lever. So all you have to do is stretch out the problem, and suddenly deontology, it starts to break. And when I say break, is your internal feelings, your moral feelings, you're starting to get uncomfortable. It's like, I'm not sure I'm willing to sacrifice everyone on the planet, right?
Right. Yeah, very good depiction. That's sweet.
Yeah, thanks, man. This is how you break utilitarianism. So all you have to do is you change up the action, right? So in the prior problem, you kill the person with a lever switch, right. But now you have to kill them hands-on with violence. You push them off, and then the fat person, clogs up the wheels, clogs up the gears, and saves the 5 people. So most people feel discomfort about physically hands-on murdering someone. And so when you say, oh, the utilitarian, they're like 90% of people say, yeah, pull the lever, reduce the deaths. But then you pull and you say, do you actually physically murder someone to save 5? Most people, it flip-flops, 90% of people say, no, I'm not going to do that. So all of in the prior scenario, all those utilitarians, they flip-flop, and now they're deontologists. They're like, screw it, I'm not murdering people. I'm not doing the utilitarian thing. I'm actually a deontologist, right?
This is also important to bring up. I think earlier that you might have been using the word kill. So a lot of people think of it as kill or as just casualties, like we use the term casualties of war, versus murder, as if there's some kind of distinction between each of those, but it is the elimination and extinguishing of a human life. I think we just don't take that very seriously when we use terms like casualties and kill versus murder, but
yeah. I mean, I guess I'm using murder to evoke the severity of what's going on here. It's like, this is a big deal. You know what I mean?
That's how I tend to think about it too. I've had a lot of ethical debates with religious fundamentalists on this, and it's as if what I'm talking about just kind of goes over their head, or they don't. It just doesn't register. The self-justified killing of a certain group of people because your belief system says that they're not worthy. that is such a bewitching form of it. It's so manipulative and it's so easy to latch onto until you start to learn these ethics. So another point I wanted to bring up, not to get too much into this, but I recently saw somebody posting a trolley problem like this recently. That they made the point that most people don't even consider this at all. Like most people don't. She said that even if there wasn't another person, like even if there wasn't one person to change the track to, like nobody was there, and you had 5 people tied to the track, most people still wouldn't change it because they have this attitude of like hands off. I don't want to be involved in any part of this.
Right.
Most people don't have any kind of virtue ethics system at all, or any form of moral compass or ethical framework.
Right, like a duty to get involved.
Yeah.
Right.
A duty
like
to humanity, preservation of life. You would think like it seems quite natural to us, I guess, but yeah, I mean.
I've noticed. Like I've always felt that sense of moral duty to be like involved with moral problems. But I've met, I was surprised to realize that some of my close friends were like, they had an opposite perspective. Like, almost like it's my duty to stay out of these things. It's like, wait a second, that doesn't sound right.
As if that absolves you of any involvement.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of...
It's like there's another quote I learned when I was taking CBT lessons actually a few years ago. Every action and every inaction that you do has effects on the world. Everything you do and everything you don't do affects the world. That's what it was.
Right, that's such a powerful way to view life. That's such a meaningful way to view life. It's like the opposite of nihilism. It's such a powerful perspective.
Yeah, it is. I hadn't thought of that, yeah.
So this is how you break utilitarianism. This is how you break virtue ethics. So virtue ethics, it's like, do the courageous thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to jump in front of the trolley. I'm going to be Superman. I'm going to be Spider-Man. I'm going to stop this trolley problem even if it kills me. Courageous. Hoorah. But then it's like, okay, bro, like we're just going to make the trolley even bigger so that your courage is futile. So like all you're doing is increasing the deaths. You haven't solved the problem with your courage, right? So all you have to do is make the problem harder to solve. And virtue ethics, it's like, how does courage solve the problem when courage is not enough, right? We need a smarter solution than just courage, because you're not big enough to stop the trolley, right? So basically, there's lots of ways to break different theories. Like people have come up with all of these crazy philosophic thought experiments. It's like, imagine a world where all of these people are eating mashed potatoes, and then imagine a world that's like heaven, and we're going to compare, and there's the repugnant conclusion. So there's a lot of ways to challenge these theories, and basically, from my investigation to these things, deontology has a lot of weaknesses. There's a lot of ways to break it. Utilitarianism has lots of weaknesses. There's a lot of ways to break it. Virtue ethics, ethics of care, like they're not even conclusive enough to even break. So level 1, not good enough. I kind of want to say something about trolley problems in general. I was kind of shocked a while ago. Someone told me, like, I think trolley problems are so stupid because, like, they're not even real. They're just, like, hypothetical. Like, that's not real life. Like, we never have to deal with that. I'm like, what? Like, wait a second, dude, do you know, like, reality, everything in reality is a trolley problem. Like,
yeah.
Like, whenever there's
forced into some kind of ideology, or we're pushed into adhering to some kind of ethical framework, whether we know it or not. I guess, is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, you just said it. You said everything you do or don't do matters. That's a trolley problem. Do you pull the lever? Or hands off, I don't pull the lever. Whatever you do or don't do, that's a trolley problem. And then when we're choosing what to do I pull this lever for that action, or do I pull this lever for that action? 2 different consequences. That's a trolley problem. And there's trade-offs. Do I invest my time into this, or do I invest my time into that? That's a trolley problem. And in politics, do we put taxpayer dollars towards this, or do we put taxpayer dollars towards that?
Yeah.
There's trade-offs everywhere. Trade-offs in time, trade-offs in money, trade-offs in attention. Like, everywhere you look, there's trade-offs. Those are all trolley problems that we have to confront and figure out, like, what's the best way to navigate all of these pathways.
Yeah. And understanding that in most cases, our decisions are not going to serve everyone, I guess, is a big takeaway from that too.
Yeah, there's limits. Yeah, you can overwhelm yourself if you think about how you're responsible for everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good breakdown.
So, should I go into the next level?
Yes.
So, level 1, now we have level 2, the educated normative ethical theories. So you're talking about synthesis at the beginning. You're like, how do philosophers get together? It's like we have different perspectives, antithesis, thesis, antithesis. We need to like bring these perspectives together and produce a conclusion, right? Produce a synthesis, and now let's all agree on the synthesis, and we can be productive, make the world a better place, go do that thing, right? So I think these kind of are closer to synthesis frameworks, right? So we can start with threshold deontology. So threshold deontology, it kind of mixes utilitarianism and deontology together. It solves some of the problems of deontology. Same with rule utilitarianism. It's trying to like synthesize deontology. So it's kind of bringing the strengths of both together in different ways, like a bias to deontology versus a bias to utilitarianism, right? So remember, the weakness of deontology is like you're just going to let the entire planet die because you're so stubborn about your morality, right? So threshold deontology, it says we're going to have there's a threshold, right? So it's like, thou shalt not pull the lever if 5 people are going to die, but if 10 people are going to die, that's the threshold. Once the problem is going to kill 10 people, okay, now we pull the lever, because 10 is just too many, right? But lower than 10, you stay away from that lever, right? Thou shalt not kill unless the threshold. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Right. So when you implement thresholds, that helps the theory not break, right? When you start stretching the problem, it's like, okay, the problem is a lot bigger. Okay, that reaches the threshold. We're gonna do the consequence-based thing.
And I suppose you could bring this into politics by allowing that to be put up to a vote as to where that threshold is.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of vote. And, we vote on thresholds all the time, right? Like, what age should we give out driver's licenses for, right? Age 16, age 18. What age should we drink alcohol at? Or what age should we smoke? What age should we draft for the military, right? Age for retirement and all those things, Social Security. And abortion. Where's the threshold for abortion, right? These are all important questions.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the abortion example too.
So with rule utilitarianism, it tries to solve the synthesis a difference from the utilitarian perspective, which is, it's like people often feel like if you're just calculating pros and cons, it's like, oh, well, maybe it's okay to kill people because look at all the benefits, and people get uneasy with that, right? So one of the classic ways to break utilitarianism is to say, like, there's 5 people that are, there's 1 healthy person and there's 5 sick people. And it's like, hey, we can kill the healthy person, take all his organs, and give his organs to the 5 sick people. And now, pros and cons, utilitarianism, haha, let's go do it. And so rule utilitarianism, they try to say, well, instead of focusing on the actions that get the benefit, right? Kill the one person, that's an action, right? Kill the one person gets you all these benefits. Okay, let's not do utilitarianism at the level of the action. Let's do utilitarianism at the level of the rule, right? And so they want to, it's more of a legalistic utilitarianism. It's like, thou shalt not kill unless all of these circumstances. So that's a rule, right? And so then you say, well, this rule, it gives lots of utility to society, right? Nobody is like afraid of their neighbor. It's like people don't have to like worry about their organs getting stolen all the time. And so like implementing like deontological rules, it like makes cooperation more cohesive. You know, society is more harmonistic. So it's like we're bringing utility at the level of the rules. And so it's kind of a meta-utilitarianism. Does that make sense?
Right. And I believe this is how much of world politics operates now, as I understand it.
Right. Let's vote on these rules, which give the most utility, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, rule utilitarianism and threshold deontology, they're getting closer to each other because they're synthesizing towards a harmony between rule-based system and consequence-based system.
Right.
And so contractualism and pragmatism, these are softer systems. So harder systems, they explain what to do more clearly. Softer systems are more vague, right? So just like the prior paradigm, like virtue ethics and care, it's more vague. Contractualism and pragmatism, it's a little bit more vague, harder to implement. But contractualism, it kind of inspires this social contract theory, which is like, let's create a system that benefits everyone, where everyone like wants to opt in. It's like the society is operating for everyone's good. It's like a contract is based on consent, right? Like you see, they're shaking hands in the image. It's like, I agree because I think this system will benefit me. I also agree because I think this system will benefit me. So you're trying to create a harmonious system that's positive sum, that's benefiting everyone. So basically, contractualism is create a moral system that everyone feels comfortable with. That's kind of the paradigm, right?
That seems like that's one of the harder ones to attain. You see that more in literal business contracts, or when you're making a small business with a group of people that has the same moral interest as you. But at the large scale, it seems harder. Yeah.
Right, but at the small scale, sometimes people just don't agree, and then they don't sign the contract. The contract fails, right? And at the level of society, it's not very. It's like. Society will collapse if we don't have a contract. So disagreement is like we have to figure out what's going to work for everyone. You know what I mean?
A lot of the times we disagree is because we're adhering to one of these other larger ethical systems too much, and we're kind of like, or we suppose that the other person is adhering to a particular ideology that we don't like, and then we neglect a possible contract because of that.
Yeah. If someone is operating under deontology and you're operating on utilitarianism, it's hard to sign a contract because it's like
right.
we have such a big disagreement about what we want to do. But yeah, so this one is still a little bit vague.
Sorry, I keep interrupting. I think the reason that works in smaller businesses is because you have a small goal set. And a lot of times, I mean, everything's infinitely interconnected. So even if you have a very small business goal, that's still going to affect millions of people. But when most people come to these agreements, they're looking at it through that lens. They're not looking at it through the whole ethical lens of interdependence and interconnection and all that.
Yeah. The more people, the more interest, the more stakeholders. It gets complicated, and that it kind of makes sense why we have so many disagreements. Pragmatism, it's basically the idea that we are, like, the good thing is to do what's pragmatic, what's practical, what achieves a good result. So it's kind of similar to utilitarianism, but it's a little bit more meta, but it's also a little bit vague as to how meta are we talking. Are we doing what's pragmatic for the individual? Are we doing what's pragmatic for the family? Pragmatic for the tribe, pragmatic for the society, nation, globe. So it's an interesting lens to focus on, but it's a little bit vague, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now we have the advanced ethical theories, my favorite. So I actually coined all of these, so I'm very shameless to promote all of these. But I wouldn't invent them if I didn't think they were necessary, right? Like, there's problems with the other theories, so it's like we got to invent something better. Because I was so disheartened by the Phil Papers 2020 survey. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
It was so disheartening because it's like we've had 2,000 years of philosophy, and in 2020, like, they're sending out surveys to philosophers. It's like, do you align with utilitarianism or deontology? Like, dude, those theories are so incomplete. Like, why is, like, 2,000 years of philosophy still stuck in such incomplete paradigms? How come we haven't achieved consensus on something better than just
scale? I think it's the scaling problem.
Yeah.
I wonder about polls too, man. Like, not to get on a tangent, but that I've heard people being in opposition to polls online as well. And I participate in every poll I can. I really appreciate the scientific method of empirical data acquisition, where you can kind of look at a worldwide consensus on something if you want to go out of that route. So I found use in this when I was doing a series on what is the meaning of life. It just so happened that Lex Friedman always asks this, or most of the time he asks at the end of his interviews, and so I did a survey of 100 of his top podcasts just to see where there are some parallels between those, and I wasn't coming into it with a particular list though, but I kind of created a list of the top answers to the meaning of life from some of the world's smartest thinkers and all of it. So I mean, I guess there is utility in it, but yeah, I see what you're saying. It's hard to know what to do with the data on that. Because, I mean, unless you're trying to make like a world government or something, it's going to be hard to put a vote of all the philosophers around the world into action.
Well, I mean, like in my ideal world, it's like all the philosophers, it'd be like 99% of philosophers, they finally agree rule utilitarianism is the best paradigm. It's like all of the data, all of the logic, all of the philosophy, it's all pointing towards rule utilitarianism. Everyone agrees, like, yay, this is the best one. But it's like in the survey, it's like we're still talking about these. Like, these are 2,000 years old, and they're so flawed. Like, why are we polling about this stuff? Let's poll. How come we're not polling on these instead? Because these are less flawed. You know what I mean?
And those are educated opinions, like you have the title right there. You would think if you're calling upon educated philosophers, they'd give the educated options.
Right, exactly. So, I don't know, man. It's just a little bit disheartening to see. But, I mean, there might be like benefits to, like, I don't know, if you're saying, do you have a deontological bias as opposed to utilitarian bias? Like, maybe that's a valuable question, but like, I want to see, like, can we, like, get some consensus on, like, an actual good theory as opposed to consensus on bad theories, you know what I mean?
You could perhaps do anthropological studies that way and look for anthropological biases, but that gets into tricky territory as well.
Right. So these are all really more complicated theories that are supposed to be more holistic, more comprehensive, less weaknesses, more integrative of all of the aspects of morality. So, I mean, moralistic synthesism right here. Synthesism is the ideology of synthesis, which it seems like you are very interested in synthesis, right? It's like, hey, let's pursue the synthesis. Let's bring these perspectives and, compromise them and make something better out of the combination, right?
Yeah.
So moralistic synthesism, this is the idea that the correct moral paradigm is a synthesis of all of the good stuff of every moral paradigm. Like, get the good stuff of virtue ethics, good stuff of care, good stuff of deontology, good stuff of utilitarianism, bring it all together, work it into a framework. That's the correct moral theory, right? It's like a super synthesis.
Right.
Okay.
I like that approach.
Yeah. The image is kind of this, kind of a symbolic bringing together of all these theories. Oh, which one do I want to talk about next? Do any of these catch your eye more than the other?
I like the intuitionism. That's a cool word. Oh, shit. I like the intuitionism. That's a cool one. That's a cool word.
Intuitionism. Yeah, this is probably that's a great one to talk about right now. So, remember how I talked about breaking an ethical theory? I find it really interesting, this process of breaking an ethical theory, right? So like someone says, it was like, raise your hand if you're a deontologist. Like, yeah, I'm a deontologist. Then they're like, but have you heard about this thought experiment? And they're like, oh no, I'm not a deontologist. You broke my theory because, same thing with utilitarianism. Hey, I'm a utilitarian. Oh, wait a second. Like, under certain circumstances, it's good to torture people because that brings utility, and people, like, their moral feelings contradict the conclusion of utilitarianism. Their moral intuition says, no, torture is bad. And so utilitarianism says torture is good. My feelings say torture is bad, right? And so the fascinating thing is people usually say utilitarianism is wrong because my feelings say no, right? That's kind of the psychological process. And so that's exposing a fact about human nature. We view our feelings as a moral authority, right? Our feelings dictate if it's correct or not. And so it's almost like we're designing moral theories to match our feelings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we should to a large degree.
Right. So that's where we bring it into evolutionary intuitionism, which is the idea that evolution has crafted and designed our moral feelings, right? So, when you see a moral problem, evolution has given you an instinctual response. It's given you some logic for how to deal with it. And it's basically the idea that it's good. Like, you're correct to follow your moral intuitions. Like evolution designs the good thing, and it's correct to follow the intuition that evolution has given you. That's kind of that paradigm.
So there's, I guess, a distinction there between evolutionary instincts versus intuition. There's you could also make arguments for evolutionary instincts to lead to people doing some pretty selfish things, like the selfish gene analogies and all that.
Okay, that very astute point. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a nuanced point. I have some nascent thoughts on that. So I think, I'm kind of agnostic about how intuitions work. Like, people debate what an intuition is in the first place. I think I think of an intuition as a synthesis between instinct and cognition, right? So our brain, half of our brain is the instinct, half of our brain is the prefrontal cortex that's doing calculations, right? And so everything we do is is a compromise between instinct, calculation. Instinct, so it's like, I want to eat some food. No, you got to be patient. I want to eat some food. No, you got to diet, right? We're constantly compromising between the two. And I think morality is similar. Intuition is that compromise between the two.
Okay. Kind of like Viktor Frankl saying, between stimulus and response, there's always room for a choice. The agency involved in intervening between your impulses, I guess, like, that could be based in some genetic predispositions versus adhering to. So, adhering to an ideology or adhering to a system of virtues. So there's also, not to get too in the weeds, but are you familiar with Gibson's affordances?
Say that again?
Are you familiar with Gibson's affordances, the concept of affordances existing out in...
I'm familiar with Vervaeke's usage of affordances, which is probably the same.
Yeah, he basically borrows most of it from Gibson. That's, So, I kind of explored this a few years ago when I started listening to Vervaeke. I have kind of an image of the universe awakening to itself in a human vessel. As cheesy as that is, I try to take that quite seriously, because that is, to me now, the ultimate way to experience life. Very much embodied cognition. I call this universal embodiment, is the way that I'm proceeding with it currently. So, somewhere out there in reality, the universe has provided / afforded us these moral structures that we would someday stumble upon, and we would try to come to some agreement upon, but at least they're out there, they're afforded to us in order to structure our lives upon. And then you also have these evolutionary impulses and instincts, and those can perhaps become more like intuitions once you start applying the affordances of logic and philosophy. And the discovery of language itself, to me, is an affordance that's afforded to the human species. Learning how to use that properly, like we're doing now, is kind of part of the mission here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Would you say in this context, it's like evolution is affording your intuitions?
Yes. Yeah. And I like it because it's like semi-loose philosophy, semi-loose language. Like, what exactly is an affordance? I mean, it's all, you could also just say it's all mechanical. Everything is just, or there's nothing truly emergent. It's all just mechanical, or everything is entirely emergent. You know what I mean? So the affordances kind of strikes a good balance there. Like, what are we allowed to do? It kind of brings in psychology. Like, what are the abilities of the human mind to overcome the brain or mind over matter? You could think of those more in a much more structured fashion through the language of affordances, I believe. But
Yeah, I think affordances is a very useful way to frame things, for sure.
Okay.
But I mean, there's kind of some weaknesses with evolutionary intuitionism. So it's like you have to really, morality is so complex, right? It's like, well, and people can go wrong. People can go off the deep end with morality. It's like, well, what about Hitler, right? Hitler has an evolutionary intuition to genocide all of the people that are not genetically related to him. Does that mean it's good to do genocide, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of times when it comes to morality, you have to go super meta, right? You have to go super meta. So it's like, there's like short-term evolutionary utility versus long-term evolutionary utility, right? So like psychopaths, it's like, oh, I want to get the short-term benefit by committing all this crime, right? Like in evolution, there are the freeloaders who are pursuing the short-term benefit it's an evolutionarily successful strategy to steal resources so you can reproduce, whatever. So, but that's a short-term evolutionary benefit. But like evolution, in the meta sense, it's a long-term process. And so the freeloaders, they eventually, the people that are getting screwed over, they're going to catch the psychopaths, they're going to put them in jail, they're going to punish them. And so it's not a good strategy in the long term, you know what I mean? And so same thing with Hitler. Hitler is a psychopath at the macro level. He's a macro psychopath. He's screwing over other races instead of other individuals. And at the long-term scale, Hitler's ideology was defeated because all of the other people united and punished him for his macro criminal behavior. You know what I mean?
Right. Another point I want to make about the evolutionary instincts. So there's also what's called what is it called? The going against the grain or delayed gratification. And so you have to ask yourself, like, why would one species put itself at risk to help another member in its species, or even another individual from another species? So I've seen videos of dogs trying to save fish by putting water on them with their snout. I've watched monkeys rescue cats from a muddy well, and I've watched dogs rescue humans that were drowning. And I've seen / heard about dolphins. Yeah, I think I've just heard about this, the dolphins rescuing humans. So you got to ask yourself, like, why? I mean, what? Like, is morality an inherent property of emergent consciousness? I mean, these animals have to be conscious at some level. I mean, comparison, like we see envy, we see human emotions in chimps. We see envy and like direct representations of jealousy and rage that, like, we would laugh at if we saw a human acting like that, but we know that we would act like that if we didn't have a moral structure. So there's so much that we have to relate to with other species too. I just wonder how much of that is an emergent property of nature.
I mean, yeah, I think life in general is much more symbiotic than we realize, right?
Yeah,
I think, so like cooperation, okay, evolution, right? Starts with bacteria, then it goes to mammals, and then it goes to like social species like humans or whatever. So it's like at the bacteria level, you've got parasites and symbiotes, right? Parasites are the psychopaths who screw each other over. And then you've got the symbiotes that are like, they cooperate. It's like, I'll give you some food if you give me some food. It's like, yay, right? Symbiotes. And like, so I feel like at every level of evolution, you've got like harmony, like long-term harmony and short-term, like short-term harm and like long-term cooperation, like, you know, every level you've got these different things. And so like bacteria are evolving symbiosis, and then mammals get on the stage and like, okay, we work together. The mammal, like you said, the dog is cooperating with like the fish or whatever. Dog is cooperating with the human. Like, I think there's a lot more hidden benefits than we realize, right?
Well, it's
and that's why
putting themselves at risk. Like they're going against what you would think you would see in evolution, is putting themselves at risk, not just to save someone from their own species, but outside their species. So that's got to be based on symbolic meaning structure. That's got to be based on the idea that this other entity means something very valuable to me, that I'm willing to put myself at risk to preserve their life. I want that human to stay around in my life more going forward. So that means I have a property of predicting forward for probably a good amount of time, not just a few days or weeks, but this idea that you have a relationship formed with them, whether it's dependence. I mean, you could say that's. I mean, how much does a dog want to put himself at risk to save his master because he has an expectation of getting food? Like, I want to say that there's more involved in that, you know.
Yeah, it's an interesting, evolutionary conundrum. But like one thing, like when you think about evolution, you have to remember that evolution operates at the level of the genes, not the level of the individual, right? So it's not about the individual's benefit, it's about the gene's benefit, right?
So I want to say something about that, but I fear I'm not as informed as I should be. Are you familiar with Michael Levin's exploration?
Oh yeah, I love his stuff.
A slightly different picture where it's more like your genes are a large part of the picture, probably the majority, but there's like your genes kind of come up in the world with the abilities that they have, and they kind of do what they can semi-conforming and semi-actualizing, I guess you could say. I wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, conform as it should be on that, but. Yeah.
Michael Levine, he's talking more about like development, like biological development, rather than evolution. In that context,
Yeah.
Like when a fetus is growing, like the DNA. He's talking about like the DNA as like a tool for developing a creature, rather than it's less of a god and more of a tool kind of a thing.
Right.
But in the context of evolution, my understanding is it's very statistical. It's like if a behavior increases the statistics for a gene, then that behavior propagates. And if a behavior hurts the statistics for a gene, then that behavior disappears.
Right, natural selection.
And so if that's how it works, then moral behaviors, right? Dog risks his life for a fish. That behavior will disappear if there's no hidden benefit. There has to be a hidden benefit for that to propagate, right?
So you're saying morality is genetically inherent. I like it. Cool.
Yes.
Genetically innate, I guess you could say. It's better word.
Right. Yeah. But so here's an example. I was thinking of this the other day. It kind of blew my mind. So like this idea of hidden benefits, right? It's like, name the two animals that humans are most fond of, right?
Dogs and cats.
Ding, ding, ding. Right. Like our emotions about dogs and cats are different from our emotions for pigs and cows, right? We factory farm pigs and cows all day long. Don't touch the dog, don't touch the cat, right? So that's a curious, that's an evolutionarily curious phenomenon. And, I was thinking the other day, I was like, I had my vehicle, got destroyed by some mice. Mice were crawling around. And, I live in an area where there's coyotes, and we've had cats that were killed by coyotes before. And so I was like, man, I really wish I could have some cats to like scare off the mice so they don't mess with my car, but the cats will die. And then my brother was like, well, maybe we should have some dogs to protect the cats, right? We have dogs and cats. Dogs scare the coyotes away, and then the cats scare the mice away, and now we're good. I'm like, holy cow, mind blown. Like that actually kind of makes sense as like this meta symbiosis, right?
Yeah. It's like when they put wolves back into Yellowstone National Park and restored everything, restored balance.
Yeah. It's like there's like trickle down cascading effects that we don't see all the interconnected benefits and pros and cons, right?
I mean, when you really think on the grand scale, if evolution was not inherently cooperative in nature, or the majority of its properties were not cooperative, you would have one species on the planet, or you're like a very small cluster of extremely dominant species, and the other ones would just die off, right? Like,
say that again.
Isn't that how I mean, if cooperation were not inherent in genetic evolution, then you would have very dominant species. Like you'd have only a small cluster of species that were just ruling the planet, and everybody else would have died off, or there would be no life. I would say.
I mean. To a large degree, yeah, I think that's right. I think niches are also important, right? So it's like the niche of living underwater, like different species would dominate different niches, right?
Right, and things balance out. I mean, there are extinctions that happen, and so I shouldn't say that everything's kumbaya and cooperative and all that, but
right.
There is to I would say a large extent, if not the majority, of what evolution does is cooperative in nature.
Right. I think that I think the gut microbiome is an interesting case study on cooperation. Right?
Even us, like us as a species, we're multi-individual. I think of it as a team. Like we're a team effort at every scale.
Yeah. I'm really optimistic about evolution, because I see evidence of cooperation at so many different layers. And like, I think evolution, sometimes evolution makes bad stuff, but I think there's a general there's a general trend towards harmony, right?
Yeah. I think Bobby Azarian gets at this too, and a lot of the complexity theorists are saying that that's kind of where the universe is going in general, is towards more order as it finds entropic balance. So as it dissipates entropy, it gravitates more towards more order, and that takes place at the individual level, like our physical structures as individual humans, as well as the societal structures and cultures and all that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, our whole body is a cooperative network of cells. Like, they're all individual agents, right? It's like it's fascinating that all of these things are individual cells that, for some reason, they're all working in harmony, perfect harmony.
And that's kind of what Levin is getting at as well. Michael Levin says it's like we have to question how the cells know to grow a hand and how they know how to stop growing a finger at the end of the finger. There's some kind of like, that's not all in the genes, basically, because you can alter the genes to grow an extra hand or an extra arm and so on and so forth. Or you could repurpose parts of the body to other parts of the body.
Yeah,
I mean, figures it out. Like, so for example, he takes a tadpole eye and he'll put the tadpole eye on a different part of the tadpole and it's still functional. Because there's this like gravitation towards unified functionality in an organism.
Right.
And in an organ, like in the organ and the organism.
Yeah. The bioelectricity stuff is very fascinating. It's very much like the environment. It's the cell is the interaction between the genes and the environment, nature, nurture, right?
Right.
It's that synthesis. And so that's, So, that gives us the evolutionary perspective on morality. Meta well-being is, it's my attempt to complexify Sam Harris's moral paradigm, right? You're probably familiar with Sam Harris's well-being paradigm.
Basically, can refresh my memory.
So it's kind of like a meta-utilitarianism, right? So utilitarianism is like, we're trying to maximize the pros and cons. Well, he zooms in on pain and pleasure, but a more complex version of pain and pleasure, which is like well-being and suffering, right? So the weakness of hedonism is it's a short-term focus on pain and pleasure. Well-being gets you that long-term focus. It's long-term well-being versus long-term suffering. So we're trying to maximize the long-term well-being, right? But then the question is, what does well-being mean? It's a very complex idea. Sam Harris has a very complex conception of well-being, and a lot of people don't realize how complex his idea is, right? So like, a lot of people say, well, Sam Harris, his well-being is the same thing as utilitarianism, and it's very easy to break utilitarianism, right? But Sam Harris's well-being, it actually incorporates elements of deontology. So like, for example, human rights are basically deontological rules, right? Like it's like you have a duty to respect people's freedom. That's a right. Like, we have a right to freedom. You have a right to vote. You have a right to do a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Like, society has a duty to respect these rules. That's deontology, right? And so Sam Harris is saying, if your brain likes these deontological rules, right? It's like, I like my freedom. So that means deontology, it helps your well-being. And so for Sam Harris, it's like we can easily synthesize deontology. It's like we can measure, it's like society is happy because we're incorporating all of these rights. It's like, yes, we want to promote deontology because it's deontology in the service of well-being, right?
Right.
And
could I try to put this in perspective here? So Harris makes a lot of points about the oppression to women for having to wear hijabs or burqas. So I felt strongly about this myself for many, many years, especially since questioning my own Christian faith when I was 18. So any form of oppression that I see, or any form of limitation of the human experience, is inherently immoral to me, no matter what. Like, I don't think there's any exceptions to this. So, strong example, standing on a mountain, feeling the wind blowing in your hair. Every human should have a right to that. And for some belief system or ideology to prevent women from feeling the wind in their hair is robbing them of one of the greatest experiences in life. I think that's a pretty easy statement to make. Do I have a duty in telling women to take their hijab off to help them live their best life?
Interesting. Yeah, I think what you're saying kind of gets into the distinction between positive rights and negative rights. Negative rights are things that people cannot do to you, right? So, like, I have a right to property. The negative right is people have a duty to not take my stuff. So, negative right. Don't do stealing. That's the negative right. The positive right is other people have a duty to do something positive for me. So it's like, I have a right to health care. Right? A right to health, that's a positive right. It's like others have a duty to do something in excess of zero, right?
So I would say I wouldn't take the hijab from the woman. That would be very bad for many reasons. I would strongly encourage, and so I would have to like question, where is the line? Where do I stop giving the encouragement? Where do I stop trying to persuade her that she is under this belief system that's limiting her capacity to live her best life? What is my duty in that regard, I guess, is the question there. Or where is
how much duty to get involved with changing their mind about what is in their best interest for well-being purposes?
Right. It's like, as a philosopher, you have like, once you realize, I mean, this also gets into hubris, though, you gotta be really careful. But once you start to gain the generalist perspective, or the meta philosophy, like we were talking about, you know, these giant bird's eye view or alien's eye view perspectives of the world, it's like you can't not do something about that. Like, I've long felt that you have a moral duty to express and share the knowledge and wisdom that you've gained once you've gained it. Because you're just
I'm very sympathetic to that too. I think that aligns with a meta well-being perspective, right? It's like you have the duty to like maximize well-being, and that means you got to get involved in these processes, right?
And this aligns with my own idea of universal embodiment as well. As the universe is beginning to understand itself through human vessels, the best way it's going to do that is through more and better communication. And those two words I just used right there, that's what Sam Harris says. He says our solution to all of our problems is more and better communication. And I've tried to argue against that, but it seems like pretty solid logic. We got to get as many good messages out there as possible that are non-judgmental. And so we have to ask, where's that line? Like, I'm not judging you. You're not stupid for falling for a belief system. We all do. We're born into our ideologies, and the relief that's felt once you can abandon that, or once you can begin to question what parts of that serve you and what parts don't, that's a very profound feeling, and I believe everyone deserves that.
And sometimes there's negative externalities. It's like, well, now they're a social outcast, and now you're responsible for the fact that they're they're suffering because of this new understanding of the world, right?
But then you have to ask choice, like you have to involve them in that picture too. Is their choice to adhere to what you were saying, or to agree to what you were saying?
Yep.
So you're culpable, I guess you could say.
Meta well-being, this well-being paradigm it's complex, but Sam Harris, he takes like a neuroscientific approach to where it's like, if we can measure the happiness in brains, we can say, hey, when you go from this ideology to this ideology, it moves you towards like a happier life and brain and collective happiness too. It's not just your brain, it's all of the brains, it's all of the well-being, all of the suffering, you know what I mean? So,
and that you could take that as a utilitarian approach as well, and what I've said with the whole universal body embodiment process, you could go very to an extreme with that, and yeah, you can get into a lot of trouble thinking that your way of the universe awakening to itself is the best way, and then you just try to, you know, eliminate the the non-believers, or like those who are not fit for universal or whatever, you know. So there's always ways for all of these to go wrong, I think, but the more we talk about this, and the more these discussions get out into the public sphere, I think that we'll make more progress.
Yeah, man. 100%. I always talk about Sapolsky on that topic, the danger of oxytocin, the danger of tribalism. Like we band together around ideologies, and then it's us versus them, and it gets problematic sometimes, you know.
We even form us versus them opinions on how to think about what Sapolsky says versus self-actualization, what Maslow says.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other rabbit hole. But yeah, that's very interesting. I really like this. This is a great structure, and also I really like the artwork and the font styles.
Yeah, thanks, man. I used GPT for the artwork.
Heck yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that? I'm going to ask some other questions otherwise.
I guess I might as well just explain the last one here, moral game theoreticism. This one, I think this one is the most powerful argument of the four. It's basically the idea that game theory is where morality comes from. And so, like, it's the mathematization, it's converting morality into mathematics, and in mathematics there's a calculable solution, you know what I mean? And so a game theoretic approach to morality might lead us towards the answers that you're trying to look. How do we implement this in society? That is a very objective and actionable approach to morality, and it seems justifiable, as that's kind of where all of our evolutionary morality is coming from. It's supervening on game theory. You know what I mean?
Yeah. A lot of people are opposed to game theory, and that's I think the opposition that I hear from people is that it just makes them uncomfortable to think that it can be that structured.
Yeah, that's an extremely good point. Like, you have to be extremely careful with this type of stuff, because the math is extremely complex, and you're probably going to get the math wrong. And if you get really dogmatic about your math, then you're probably going to become the next Hitler. Mm-hmm. So it's like, you've got to be super meta about morality. You can't be tribal with. If you apply tribalism to any of these paradigms, it's going to be horrible, right? There's short. Yeah, as I think the short-term perspective is always wrong. So if you're doing short-term game theory, then you're just going to be a Hitler. You have to do the long-term game theory in order to have good morality.
Right. You got to run a lot of models. Fortunately, this is where I think AI is going to play a huge role. Is being able to, like, imagine you could run thousands of simulations of the game Civilization.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like apply that to, like, just plug in all of the variables. Now again, when I say all the variables, that's like billions of variables, but you know, I mean, you could narrow down on some major archetypes, major categories, and kind of see where you go from there. And we're doing this now. There are it's not that game. There's another game that's like Civilization, but they're getting it to learn that as well. Sweet, man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
So
game theory is tricky. I really like the idea that oxytocin does play a role in that, and just in our tribalism and our tribalistic instincts. I guess, like, I want to ask a question. Do you think that we can repurpose our oxytocin when we expand and transcend our tribes? to feel love and connection and interdependence with the whole of the species, and transcend that Dunbar number, specifically that 150 person Dunbar number. For me, that's what it feels like for me. I feel like I've reached that point of enlightenment or whatever, and so when you begin to think this way, you think that you've got it all figured out and that you can host podcasts and be the next Jesus, or go give public lectures and everybody believe you and all that. So, but yeah, I mean, do you think that's how that works? Like, do you think we're still using the same neurochemistry? It's just again, mind over matter, conscious decision to change the way that we're thinking about these paradigms and still keep using that same neurochemistry.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding of Robert Sapolsky's work on oxytocin is that the way we use oxytocin is very flexible, right? So we could apply so the oxytocin is the tribal chemical. It creates the tribal bond. So like a mother bonds to her child, and it's like, I love my child and I hate anyone who threatens my child. That's the mother bear tribalism. And so you could apply it to your child, you could apply it to the family, you could apply it to your race, you could apply it to your nation, right? It's like, I'm an American, my oxytocin is applied to the American flag, and I will die for that flag, right? You can apply it to like a sports team, like, here is my sports cap, and I will fight for this sports team, and anyone who competes with my sports team, I hate them, and love-hate tribalism, you know what I mean? And so, like you're saying, there's, like, if we can expand our tribe, that seems like the direction towards more harmony, more well-being, more cooperation. That seems like the correct long-term game theory, is to expand the tribe and get that bigger and bigger. That's Peter Singer's expanding circle. And like, if we can expand it to everything, as like, oh, like super meta harmony, like that seems awesome, right? If we can all work together for existence. That's the way. The game of life is to exist, and so if we can stop fighting, we can all exist in harmony, right?
Right. Work towards a protopia.
Protopia? I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, that's a term came up recently. Not recently, a couple years ago, and I don't know who said it because I heard it from somebody else that didn't know who said it either. But it means working towards eudaimonia, or working towards a utopia. So we're never going to actually it's like an admittance that we're never actually going to reach a utopia, but as long as we
it's like
trying, that's what
right. I like that. It sounds like a humble utopianism, something like that.
Yeah, well said.
I like that. Yeah, that sounds very Vervaakean. Did you get that from?
No, I'm gonna look it up though. Protopia Futures, Monica Bielskite, yeah.
Yeah.
Word up. So I'm gonna ask you some questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, man.
About Vervaeke. So I want to try to talk about a few of his terms. Are you familiar with the term aporia?
Yes. Yeah, it's like a positive state of confusion. Philosophic ambiguity, and it's he kind of talks about this horizon of wonder, right? It's like often when we're dealing with philosophic dilemmas, it's like we try to get to the root of the problem. It's like we think that this is the answer. Oh, here's the antithesis. You've got a problem, and we dig deeper. It's like maybe this is the answer. Oh, there's more problems, and like, in a lot of the Socratic dialogues, in a lot of philosophy in general, you go a little bit deeper and you kind of like, you run out of logic, you run out of explanation. It's like, what happened before the Big Bang? We kind of run out of data. It's like, I don't know, there's just this blob of confusion. We've gone too deep, right? And aporia, it's like you kind of you bump up against this wall of like an abyss. And often this Vervaeke frames it this way, like the ideal way to face this is with positivity. Be like, oh wow, like maybe there's more to explore. And so I view it as like the opposite of cognitive dissonance. It's like we have this we have contradictions, we have this confusion, and like we feel negativity, and we're like, oh, we want to like push away the problem. Like, ew, I don't like philosophy, there's too many contradictions. Or it's like, well, I just want a dogmatic answer. Like, here's my religious answer, and I'm just going to hold to that because I'm afraid of confusion, right? And so this horizon of wonder, it's like approach aporia with wonder, with awe, with positivity. It's like it's an invitation to explore. Don't be afraid of the abyss. Embrace the abyss, right?
Right, because it can't hurt you to think. Although, I guess there's risk of existential crises too. So
yeah,
that's always a thing. I do very much like that. So he has something he talks about in After Socrates, that series, where he describes it kind of like you go out to explore and then you return to your heart home, or your hearth, like the hearth or however you pronounce that, at your home that makes you feel warm and comfortable in your home. So there's lots of ways to arrive at that too, like personal fulfillment, satisfaction, and comfortability in the mystery, and also there's a role for not thinking about it and distracting yourself from it too. So I do believe there is some value in staying occupied and not philosophizing too much, because you have to get out into the world and make your contribution for one thing, but there's also like you can get stuck in, I don't want to say stuck, but you can arrive in rabbit holes and spirals that can really sap your life force if you follow them too closely. This is something that Wittgenstein warned against as well, with the exploration of language itself. It can really pull the rug out from under you if you're not careful. So there's it's an irresolvable internal contradiction or logical disjunction in a text, argument, or theory. This is aporia. And we're in that time, man. Like, we're not going to have the answers for a long period, but we're really in the period where we got to ask a ton of questions and answer a ton of questions.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of decision paralysis when you get bogged down in all these details. You can get so obsessed with all of this investigation. Like, we gotta dig deeper, get more data, get to the bottom of it, right? And that's valuable because you're getting accuracy, you're getting clarity. But if you can't take what you find and bring it back to the surface, then you're not helping us like achieve actionable solutions. Right. And it's exactly what you said. That's what we need. But it's kind of like we have to agree on the fundamentals before we can agree on the solutions. So it's almost necessary.
Man.
Like, we need to have these deeper fights before we can actually solve anything. You know what I mean?
Wow, what you're describing is exactly the problem that we're seeing in the psychological sciences today. We're running off of a paradigm that is not being examined at the depth that it deserves. And what we're seeing is a counterproductive paradigm. We're seeing a counterproductive result from being overconfident in one view of the human condition, not accounting for all of the other factors. Sucks. Yeah. Let's hope we can fix it soon, because it's causing a lot of problems in my opinion. But it's oh man, that's such tricky territory.
Sounds like you're alluding to the meta crisis, Daniel Schmattenberger's meta crisis,
and just in general the mental health crisis, where we exacerbate. It's so tricky, but we can exacerbate our mental health by thinking that we have mental disorders or adhering to the new diagnostic process that we're seeing emerging. But that's 405 pages that I have written on that topic. I don't have to get into it.
Nice.
But yeah, very tricky territory there.
For sure, man.
So the Greeks had a conception of the ability to sense their environment. I was just watching one of Vervaeke's videos on the phronesis, and that's like kind of your sensory perception, but also your ability to what we call social awareness or self-awareness when you're in public situations. And he distinguishes that from philia, which is this love of, essentially, or the ability to he says it's like the ability to relate all the levels of reality together into a comprehensive whole. That's what we think of wisdom. Which is a beautiful definition. It's kind of like the Greeks had an early conception of the nervous system being distinguished from the mind, the subjective, initially experiencing self, and the contemplative self. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds like, there's multiple ways to interpret all of these words, but it seems like a valid way to interpret it and build a paradigm based on those words. And I really like the nervous system metaphor. It's such a powerful way to describe kind of this inherent, skillful knowledge, right? Because there's a lot of instincts that are like behavioral instincts that are just built into the nervous system. Like your doctor will test your knee, right? He'll smack your knee with the hammer, and you've got that instinct right built into your nervous system, right?
And also, like catching a soccer ball after you've played soccer, and you learn through what Vervaeke calls participatory knowledge, how to participate in society, which can be done completely non-verbally.
Yeah. There's tons of stuff that is kind of at that subconscious, almost instinctual level, which is super important to keep that, to remember the relevance of that half of everything.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, so I guess like phronesis is kind of like that participatory knowledge that you can't necessarily get from propositional knowledge.
Yeah, I am.
Sensing the right thing to do, or just sensing, reading the room, I think is how we think of it now, as phronesis.
So like Vervaeke, he talks about like the propositional, which is like the most superficial. Then he's got the procedural, which is like the skillful, which is next layer deep. Then participatory, which is next layer deep. Then oh, did I mess that up? Perspectival.
So I get it mixed up too.
Yeah, perspectival, and then participatory.
Participatory, and then you learn how to proceed in reality with procedural knowledge, and then from all of that accumulated, then you can proceed to making propositions about reality. But Vervaeke says we have the reversed, which totally makes sense. We're just proposing based on whatever comes into our heads, and whatever feels good.
Right. And what that paradigm is very relevant to all of this. What we're talking about is like the procedural is like, thou shalt not steal. Like, here are the moral rules. Like, thou shalt deontology, thou shalt well-being, thou shalt game theory, right? And then we have to dig beneath the procedural. It's like, is that procedural justified by these deeper layers? You know what I mean?
Yeah, the procedural knowledge is tricky too, and I think he also
I think I spoke incorrectly. Propositional. The rules are propositional.
Right. Okay, and you can kind of adhere to those as your form of procedural knowledge too much. Like the way that you proceed through reality, literally, you can adhere to someone's misguided propositions and proposals, or your own misguided proposals and propositions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really, when I learned that really shook me out of determinism. Because you wouldn't have deterministic explanations of perspectival knowledge. And we really don't understand how participatory knowledge works either. Like he gives the Tai Chi examples, and where you do martial arts, or any of the embodied cognition, like going to the 4E cognitive science aspect of this. Yeah. Like you can learn how to proceed and participate in society very much non-verbally as well. There's many examples of that.
I mean, it's interesting to contrast. It's interesting to contrast them as like, there's interesting moral studies where you can compare the propositional morality against like the instinctual morality, right? So you can, on a piece of paper, you can say, hey, here's a weird moral dilemma. What do you do? A, B, C, or D? They're like, I think I would do A. And then you like shove them into an environment. It's like, oh no, there's a child running across the road. I've got to do something. And sometimes in the moment, like you get the adrenaline and you make a snap decision. And the interesting thing is our snap decisions are instinctual. there's a discrepancy between A, B, C, or D, that's our rational calculation, and the instinctual morality. It's fascinating how there's a discrepancy, right?
Yeah, it's like putting it into practice. So there's the problem of putting your philosophy into practice, which is most problematic for philosophers and preachers, and practicing what you preach. You can be overwhelmed and you can be confused as to which rule system you want to adhere to because you're reacting more in that moment versus when you have more time to think and contemplate. So this is like Kahneman and Tversky's System 1 and System 2 thinking. Mm-hmm. So when you have time to slow down and think, you can respond better and remember your cues, remember your virtue system, remember your ethics.
Right.
So if people freak out when they don't understand how that works, when they're like, why did I make this decision? Well, it's probably because you didn't have time to think about it because we're always rushing around all the time. And so you can grant yourself a lot of grace from that, which can be dangerous and also useful. And you can grant people a lot of other grace, or other people grace and empathy because of this. Because you can extend that, like, again, the determinism part of it, we don't really know, like, what is exactly reacting in the moment? What is System 1 and System 2 thinking? I never really understood exactly what Kahneman and Tversky meant about that, because it's so context dependent, and there's so many different contexts. So, I mean, when you count up all the factors, like if you had a bad lunch, or if you didn't eat lunch, or if you didn't get enough good sleep, and so on and so forth, you will likely find it harder to adhere to your values, even if you do have a good 5 minutes to think about the moral decision that you're about to make. Or maybe even an hour, or even like days beforehand to contemplate on something. I mean, I've made bad decisions about purchasing a vehicle, even after having months to decide about it. So,
So my perspective is that from a neuroscientific perspective, the calculative decisions, the calculative morality, that's based on prefrontal cortex, this front section. The more instinctual stuff, that's probably, it's probably the more ancient systems. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe your brainstem, maybe like your hypothalamus, maybe the limbic system. But there's an interesting in-between zone, right? The instincts and then the calculative cognition. The dichotomy there. There's an in-between zone, which is like the learnable instincts. That's the cerebellum. Or it's like you can program your own instincts into the cerebellum. If you do repetition, like you play basketball, you repeat a behavior, you program that instinct into the cerebellum. I think religions often hack into that. It's like, hey, don't do drugs. Remember, don't do drugs. If you're in the moment, if you have to make a split decision, remember, don't do drugs. And it's that repetition it builds a learned instinct, right?
I wonder if that's more effective when it comes to behavioral participatory knowledge and embodied cognition activities. So, like, I can learn to play baseball a lot faster than I can learn to stop smoking cigarettes or not take a drink when somebody offers me a drink, based on an ideology or a belief system that tells me I should not take this drink.
You're saying it's easier to learn to play basketball than to learn to not drink alcohol?
It's easier to program physical behavioral movements. So, I mean, I can give a lot of examples with instruments as well. Like, maybe it's easier for me to learn to play simpler instruments. Guitar is much harder than a kalimba, but I feel like I learned kalimba really fast, and I can kind of master that way faster than I could master self-awareness and the application of a moral compass.
I mean, part of it, like, part of me questions if you're giving equal effort. It's like, how many hours do people put into basketball to get good? How many hours are you putting into moral development? You know what I mean?
Right, and maybe the parallels I'm making aren't very good there, because you're always going to play the same situation in a basketball game, but these moral compass applications are very much more context dependent.
Right. It would be like you're training a specific moral skill, right? In this situation, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be courageous. Right.
I want to say the best example of working the brain like a muscle like this is seen in meditation. And when you activate those parts of the cerebellum, those parts of the default mode network, neocortex and prefrontal cortex, you reinforce those reactions. Like your reactions will be much more system 2E. Your reactions will be much more patient and more broad spanning, more considerate, more empathetic, and so on and so forth. Whereas you'd be more reactive if you don't practice that. And this is why the meditators will tell you that meditation is like a practice. It's a muscle that you got to work in the brain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Yeah, but it's an interesting related thing is like the value of it's like simulating a problem, right? So they say like in basketball, if you imagine successfully shooting the ball, right, it increases your chances. It's like meditating on the problem and the solution helps you train the brain to actually do it, interestingly.
Right, kind of like rehearsal. So when we're thinking, very often we're doing micro muscle movements in our tongue and our throat. We're speaking to ourselves, we're just not speaking aloud. So I guess it's kind of like that. I also think about this with flow arts. I remember in my youth I would imagine fire spinning. I would mostly do like poi spinning, that kind of thing. And I noticed that it took a lot of cognitive effort to do that. Like there are things that I can imagine and activities in three-dimensional space that I could imagine doing while driving, but I can't. And I could write music in my head while driving, but I can't imagine working in a 3D space with poi, because then you're considering physics at a deep level. Your counter motion, like when you pull your arm back, you have to consider what's going to happen with the ball at the other end of that when you're doing certain spins, and then when you split the spin and so on and so forth. That took too much effort for me to be able to do that while driving. So I say this to say that there's probably variance in that. Like there's probably a lot of variance in how all of these applications can be put into practice and how all these ways of thinking can be activated. I would think that if you practice meditation first, that would give you the kind of patience to proceed with these virtues and then be able to activate instinctively those kind of intuitions. They become more intuitive.
Yeah. I'm really bad at being consistent in a meditation habit, but whenever
Me too.
like every once in a while, I'll do it 3 days in a row, and like the changes in like my self-control, focus, clarity, it's like astronomically powerful for me.
Yeah.
So
I have the same
it's
effect.
I'm like, why don't I do this? It's so beneficial.
We don't live in a world that encourages that, or maybe we don't live in a country that encourages that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm trying to crack down on that because I have that exact same effect, man. It is quite profound. Your breathing, it's like there's a quote, awareness starts at the breath. Most people aren't even breathing right. I wasn't really, until I learned this, and I still catch myself doing short breath and not being aware. But we're very disconnected in that regard. And of course that means we're disconnected from any kind of moral structures as well.
For sure, man.
What do you think about ratio religio, or ratio religio?
Yeah, so on my YouTube channel, I have a After Socrates series where I try to simplify some of Vervaeke's concepts in a visual way, and it's kind of my interpretation of the concepts, so there's a little bit of liberty of interpretation. So my interpretation of his ratio religio, it's like ratio is kind of a generic vibe of rationality. Religio is the generic vibe of religiosity. And so we're getting meta with this. Meta rationality, meta religiosity. So what does that mean? Rationality, it's like your logic, and it's like and logic is very like detailed. It's like propositional. What are the details? What are my premises? Let's do the math of what to do. It's very prefrontal cortex. It's very left brain for narrow details and calculating and building things from the ground up. And then the religio, it's like the pattern recognition. It's the big picture thinking. It's the narratives. It's the, how do we orient our goals and our values and trajectories? And it's the big picture thinking and the small picture, macroscopic and the microscopic, left brain and the right brain, religious and the logical. We have to merge all those together into harmony in order to function properly.
Right. This is why he needs to do more work with Ian McGilchrist. I have opinions on why they're not, and I have opinions on why there's a lot of collaboration that's not happening between people that need to be collaborating in this regard. But I'll get into that here. One parallel I have noticed is this left and right brain dichotomy that psychology was so opposed to for near half a century, and it's become revived again thanks to the work of Ian McGilchrist. He says the left brain is more concerned about acquisition and capturing a proposal, or it's more acquisition and possession based, and then the right brain is more explorative, I believe. It's cool because he puts down a list of all these attributes that are most commonly seen in either part of the brain.
Yeah, his book is on my to-do list. I really got to get a hold of that one.
Which one?
Master and His Emissary.
Oh yeah, I want to read both. They're like thousands of pages, so that keeps making me put it off. Yeah, it's I think I benefit most from his talks, honestly, and because you just get a wealth of knowledge in that regard.
Right. Yeah, it's I love getting all these different perspectives from all these experts and trying to synthesize them together.
Yeah. Well, speaking of objective truth, when people say there's no such thing as objective truth, what do you think they mean? Like, what's the point of ethical philosophy if we can't come to some form of synthesis?
Ooh,
Is context the main problem?
Spicy question. Okay. Objective is like one of the most, lots of people complain about this word because like it's probably one of the most bastardized words in philosophy. Everyone has, like all these different philosophic tribes are using the word in different ways. Some are justified, some are not justified. I have a whole like linguistic paradigm for how to use the word objective. I've been trying to get clarity, and I'm trying to persuade people to adopt my paradigm because it's like, remember, like we have to agree on the deep stuff so we can solve the superficial stuff. If we're not using words correctly, we're never going to solve problems. Let's go down a couple layers. Let's agree on the words, then we can actually, whatever. So, I view objective. I don't know how long you want me to spiel on this word.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll try to be efficient with time on that. So, I think that the etymology of a word is useful for achieving linguistic consensus, right? So, the problem with words is we have to agree on what they mean, right? And so it's like, no, I disagree with you, Seth. I want it to mean this helps my theology, so I'm going to define it this way. It's like, okay, let's go to the roots. We can all agree that it comes from this root, right? So if we agree on the roots, maybe we can abstract from the roots and agree on the abstraction, right? So the root of objective is of or like an object. It's like you're converting the noun into an adjective. So it's like
object-ish.
Exactly. We're saying this is object-ish. So it's kind of a vibe. It's not super like rigid. It's like this is object-ish. Okay. Like, can we agree that objective means object-ish? Okay, what does that mean? Well, that's context dependent. Different contexts mean different things.
And the same is true for subjective, because your subjective sense of self is different in different contexts. At different times.
Exactly. Yeah. And people underestimate how many contexts there are. Like people say, oh, objective, it's just this context. I was like, no. Like all of this confusion is because all of the contexts are bleeding together. like objective ontology is different from objective epistemology, is different from objective morality, which is different from objective, like in military, like this is our objective, we're going to go get the goal. Or in a sentence, like you've got a subject of a sentence, you've got an object of a sentence, the subjective clause, the objective clause, like all of these different contexts. We got to be clear with the context, you know what I mean? So yeah, so the interesting thing about an object is objects have a multiplicity of attributes or properties. And so in different contexts, we're extracting a subset of the relevant attributes. Like in the context of ontology, what are the relevant attributes of an object? Well, objects are made of materials. Materials are atoms. So in the context of ontology, objective means materialistic. Okay. Great. Subjective, that's conscious experience. In ontology, we're talking about consciousness, right? Okay, we'll go to epistemology. What are the relevant attributes of an object? Well, like when we say there's an object, like everyone in the room can confirm, yes, like this apple is an object. It's not a hallucination. Look, I can touch it, you can touch it, he can touch it. All of us can measure it and we can verify that it's a real thing. So it's a collective epistemic verification. If there's a group that can verify it, that's objective. That's epistemic objectivity, right?
So I would also say that's an objective truth then. It is objectively true that this is a physical apple, and it's true that apples take this form, and then if you plant this seed, it will grow an apple tree. And so, but that is an epistemic truth. That's not necessarily ontologically accurate, because we don't know what ontology is. We don't know what reality truly is. We know that the human perspective perceives apples in this way, and we can all agree that as humans, and probably as most other animals, we perceive apples in this form.
Very astute distinction. Exactly, you nailed it. Man, we're all subjectively verifying that this apple is, objectively verified, objectively true in its existence, but the nature of that existence is a separate question.
And this
For
is
sure.
where people use the capital T versus lowercase t, and I don't really think that's very productive in my opinion, but I had another question. So I was wondering about isms and ists, and I posted a thing on Facebook about this. I didn't get a lot of reactions, but I mean, I feel like there honestly should be a field of study, or at least a realm of philosophy that is concerned about when it's useful to employ isms and ists and when it's not. Because I'm a humanist. Mm-hmm. I am a humanist, and I will defend that label with a lot of vigor and a lot of emotion and a lot of meaning in my life. To call myself a humanist is a very meaningful thing to me. I am a citizen of the world, as they say, but again, what does that mean? I mean, what is it to be human and all that? So, but, it's useful in that context. I think that in those cases. But when you say you're a communist, or you're a capitalist, that's such a very nuanced form of ist.
So the way I view what's going on here is your oxytocin, right? The tribal chemical, your oxytocin is attaching to the ideology, right? The ideology is a game theory, right? So a game theory is a strategy. So it's like, how do we operate in the world? Under what framework do we operate? What is our strategy? Humanism is a strategy. We treat all humans as valuable, right? Okay, and your oxytocin attaches to that because I think that this strategy will make the world a better place. I think that this strategy makes it to where my genes can exist better. And so, all of this evolutionary drive is saying, this is good for me, we, us, But, people disagree. It's a calculation. It's is humanism the best? Or is sentientism the best? Or is, Christianity the best, or is communism
Yeah, and the definitions, like when I say humanist, I mean like I like to think that humans have rights. Like I'm mostly thinking in terms of human rights, not prioritizing humans over other species. But that's, again, where this causes problems. Like when I use the term humanist, it can have me thrown into a boat I don't necessarily ascribe to. Same with nationalism. Like I'm really wary of anything that looks like nationalism. But I'm also wary of globalism, and I'm also wary of dissolving my connection to any tribes or dissolving my connection to the nation that I live in. I mean, there's got to be value in calling yourself a citizen of the nation that you live in. And if you don't want to live in that nation, then there are options, you know.
Yeah, like some people, they think like patriotism, that's the best way to exist. It's like, if we hate our country, we're going to collapse and die. We have to love our country, and we have to defeat all our enemies. Like, we need this patriotism, because I'm afraid we're going to get destroyed either from externally or from within. So latch on to patriotism. You know what I mean? It's sometimes the fears persuade you as to which strategy is best.
Right. There's fear, and there's like disgust responses to the insular cortex. I find a lot of biology underlying that too, and tribalism especially. Nationalism's tricky, man. Like, we're very much at odds with that. I mean, you can say that you want to change your country because you love your country. Like, I don't see a problem with that. But then we start making proposals about the parts of the country that are wrong, that need changing, or the social structure that you have that could use modification, then you get thrown into one of these camps. And I think in the large majority of cases, we need to try to avoid the use of ists and isms and avoid the abhorrence to ists and isms, but we also have to recognize that we need them at some levels.
Yeah, I mean... Are you familiar with integral theory?
Yes. In what context, though?
The way, I mean, so integral theory, it like talks about, like, there's the beige ism, there's the purple ism, there's the red ism, the orange, the blue, the yellow, the turquoise. It creates a paradigm of all these isms, and the kind of meta hypothesis, or like the meta-ism, is that you're supposed to like harmonize all of the isms. It's like you got to treat each of the isms with respect and incorporate the good of all the isms into this integrative synthesis. So it's kind of
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, going back to like the moralistic synthesism, it's kind of similar to that, but it's it invokes cultural evolution and psychological evolution, and trying to harmonize all of these ideologies.
Right on. Yeah, this seems most tricky in regards to theism and atheism, or religiosity and all that.
Right. But I feel like Vervaeke, he's trying to pursue this synthesis between theists and atheists, right? I think he calls himself a non-theist, and he's trying to bring in all this religio with the atheistic ratio, and bring it together.
He's so far the only person that's taking that job seriously, in my opinion. I mean, the closer to truth is pretty good too, but closer to truth is less conclusive and less propositional. It's
closer
much more
to truth. Yeah, it's just more exploratory rather than conclusive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a pet project that is in line with this ratio religio. So like Vervaeke, he's taking a very like academic approach to ratio religio. He's building like this philosophic paradigm to bring the two together with all these ritualistic practices, meditation, whatnot. I'm taking a slightly different approach. It's just a pet hobby of mine, which is to build a mythology. I think stories, I've been influenced by Jordan Peterson in some ways. Like, I disagree with a lot of his trajectory over the last few years, but some of his older content is really interesting, and like talking about narratives and story and meaning and myth. I think he's onto something with kind of the value there. I feel like philosophy, all this academic stuff, it doesn't connect with the majority of people, right? And I think the mythological story, it's the anime, it's the movies, it's the fantasy fiction. That stuff kind of resonates with us as like embodied examples. This is a Vervaeke concept, which is the imaginal versus the imagination.
Yeah.
Or yeah, imaginary. Yeah. The imaginal is where you put yourself in the shoes of the hero, right? You can actually you transform yourself a lot more when you embody the archetype, rather than academically learning the archetype. Like, you're supposed to be a deontologist. Like, that doesn't work. It's like, hey, here's an example of a deontologist. Go embody that. You know what I mean?
Right. I really like that. I also have been wondering how that can be implemented best. So there are some problems when adhering to any value system. Obviously, you can never do it perfectly, but when you also run into problems with idolizing people, and if you're not careful, you can think that this one person has all the answers, and it's very easy to fall into that. Irvin Yalom calls this the ultimate savior complex or ultimate rescuer complex, and so you can become far overconfident in somebody else's overconfidence if you're not careful. And then you also have the risk of not leading your own authentic life and creating a story for yourself, I guess you could say, to adhere to and to create and perhaps inspire others upon later on.
Yeah.
That's very complicated, and I have not thought this through at all, but I have thought about that part, I guess.
Yeah. Well, in the mythology.
I like that approach, though.
In the mythology, I'm trying to incorporate Aristotelian ethics, and Aristotelian ethics, it involves like, be wary of the excess. So it's like, yeah, you can be a hero, but like, what happens when the hero goes too far, right? It's like always be wary of like going too far, the excess. I think that's a valuable, and like idolization, that's an excess. Like, don't go too far in hero worship, right?
Yeah, there's some psychologist that there's this beautiful little poem he wrote, and it started with something like, "Go gently, everything with patience and gentleness, my child," or something like that. And I mean, that's the way he wrote it was very beautiful, but there is that process that really seems to be like, that's kind of a requirement, or like a universal affordance / requirement, is to do everything with patience and really, or most things with patience, and that way you'll see better results. Like the majority of the time that you take your time with things, you see better results.
Mm-hmm. But don't go too far with patience.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a time for this and a time for that and a time for something and a time for something else. There's another poem like that too. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think, is that Solomon, the Ecclesiastes, or yeah, whatever.
Might have been Thoreau. No, it's not Thoreau. That's cool though. I mean, Vervaeke he's probably doing the best job of this right now, and I don't see anyone proceeding with as much humility and nuance as John Vervaeke is.
Yeah.
He calls himself a Neoplatonist, I guess, but that's the only label I see him really ascribing to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I haven't studied Neoplatonism enough to fully grasp what all that entails, but like the general vibe I get is like, it's kind of like the Platonic forms, and it's like abstracting out, like Plato has this theory of like there's like there's perfect math, and there's like perfect beauty and perfect goodness. Like there's these abstract things, and then like Neoplatonism, I think, unifies all the perfection into like one. So like God is like this perfect unity, like the mathematical one is also combining all the good things, and it's God at the same time, or something like that.
This is why I wish you'd spend more time on Spinoza, because I got a lot out of studying Spinoza in that regard. Like a real logical approach to the oneness of everything, and putting God into that. There's real pantheism.
My whole issue with the concept, I'm an atheist, and I mean, I feel like
That's an ist.
I feel like say what?
That's an ist.
I'm not as afraid of ists. I've accepted my humanity. I feel like some ists are inevitable, so I'm at one with my human flaws. I have an ist.
Yourself. Yeah.
Being aware of it is half the battle. So, yeah, I'm an atheist, and my issue is I feel like God, I feel like we know what the word God means. It's like it's an agent. Like an agent is like an entity, and the entity, it has goals, and the entity takes actions to accomplish their goals. Like God is like this supernatural agent that is taking actions to accomplish his goals. Is he a good God? Is he a bad God? Is he Hercules? Is he the Christian God? Like, they have different goals and they have different actions, but all of them are agents, right? And we understand agency and we understand agents. And then people want to redefine God as like, God is the universe. Like, is that an agent? Like, wait.
I know.
So I feel like why are we redefining God away from agency? Like, that's a very clear, consistent way to think about God. To me, it doesn't make sense to call a non-agent God. Doesn't make linguistic sense to me.
Yeah. When I read Spinoza, I think that's the best attempt at pantheism that we could probably have. But we're not going to get it. I mean, that it doesn't serve, it doesn't explain. The only conception of God that we have is a creator God, like that, or gods that do part of the creating of the earth, and then the God of the water to God, and so on and so forth. So you have to ask, like, where did that God come from? And then we get caught into infinite regress. But then you can also ask, where did the universe come from? And then we get caught into infinite regress. So we're just stuck in this, possibly there's a God that's just not participating at all. He's got this malevolent or just passive creative impulse where he just throws existence out into existence.
The demiurge.
Yes, the demiurge. And I don't, I guess if I had to ascribe to a label, it's probably non-theist. I don't like where the concept of atheism has gone. I think that what you're describing is a completely logical perspective, but I think a lot of people, when they describe atheism, they're coming at it from the anti-theism route, and you don't seem to be doing that.
I'm anti the bad aspects of atheism. I'm anti the bad aspects of theism as I see them, and I'm pro the good aspects of theism as I see them.
Right. I think you could call that atheist, or as well as non-theist too. Actually, I don't know. I mean, we could debate terms again, but it kind of comes back to pragmatics and how you live. Yeah.
Right, but like, I mean, when I say that, like, that's like, there's like two different levels. There's like the truth level, and then there's like the, like, I mean, like the practical, like the lifestyle level. It's like, yeah, maybe you can get some benefits from like mythology, but like that doesn't mean it's true, right? So I'm an atheist at the truth level, and then I'm like, there might be some good things at the practical level. You know what I mean?
That sounds more like agnosticism, maybe. Although I don't know. Like, agnosticism usually is the whole, you don't know whether there's a God or not, and you're just staying open-minded the whole time, which sounds indecisive to me.
Right. So gnosis refers to knowledge, and so that's at the truth level. It's like gnosis means not knowledge or lack of knowledge. So the agnostic is like, I don't know, maybe there's a God, maybe not. Whereas I'm not agnostic. I'm like, I'm like 99.9999% confident there's no God. Atheist.
I got you. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I debate this constantly, and it's, over the years, it's been less pressing for me to really be decisive on, because the evidence is, like, we're not going to find any more evidence anytime soon, but it's all theory. I do like thinking about it, though. I mean, simulation theory to me seems like Silicon Valley's attempt at reanimating a silicon god or something. It's or silicon. Like, we think that we're in a simulation, then who created the simulation? The simulation overlord did. Well, then who created that simulation overlord? It's the same thing that we see with God.
Infinite regress. Yeah.
Infinite regress.
Yeah. Are you trying to open the simulation can of worms? Is that what you just did?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm done with questions and I'm just kind of rambling now. This has been a very good discussion. I mean, the role of God and the point you're making about metaphors, though, I do want to touch on that a bit. I think that the role of story and allegory, which involves metaphor, I think that's very useful, because I think that's another evolutionary intuition, I guess you could say, or another evolutionary instinct to have story as the main way that we understand reality. Obviously, this is how people fall for stories, how they fall for narratives. We crave narrative absolution. This is a phrase that I keep finding myself using, is that we crave narrative absolution. And when religions provide that, but if you examine them, they kind of dissolve.
Are you familiar with like the mimetic evolution concept?
No.
So memes are like ideas, or like that's the
Yeah, I understand. Like Dawkins.
So like
memes and all.
Yeah. So mimetic evolution, it's the idea that ideas evolve, and so religions could be like, you could think of religions as like this complex idea structure, and you could say like religion evolves as an idea structure, which means, so it's a fascinating concept, because it's a little counterintuitive, because like, well, how can something without DNA evolve? You know what I mean? It's like these narratives are like abstract concepts that evolve, but like we are like our brains are almost like our brains give life to them, and they're like, you can think of it as like we host these ideas. And so it's like a society invents an idea, and then if that society thrives, then it's like, oh, we should, like, it's good to inherit the ideas of our parents because our parents survived, and so those ideas must have been good enough for survival. So it's good to inherit the religion of your parents or the ideology of your parents, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to pull up.
Chris and I are proposing.
I can't. You muted yourself. I can't hear you. Sorry.
I was trying to pull up one of these videos. Vervaeke has a term he uses. It's it's not here. The collective intelligence of distributed cognition.
Yeah.
I love thinking about that, man. That's one of the funnest things, but it comes with risk as well. If you're not an Easterner, I feel like it's much easier to contemplate these ideas if you're an Easterner, or if you're at least not a Westerner. Like, there's a difference in interpretation there. I mean, we're so like crystallized in our identity. Like, we really think that this is the whole picture, is just me. Very dualistic and not monist. Very much. I have the homunculus, and my homunculus is the one homunculus that definitely doesn't have other homunculuses behind it that are calling the shots that he talks about. And I'm directing all of my attention, and so we run into problems with that, because that's not the case. We're very much into this system of distributed cognition. We occupy a space in this world with what a lot of people call the superorganism, and I really like thinking about that too. That's really broadened my perspective and made me feel this whole deontology, this duty towards the species, towards spreading knowledge, wisdom, and kindness, looking for random acts of kindness comes much more naturally to me now by thinking this way. But I also use psychedelics. Used. It's past tense. That made some major breakthroughs that I can see people are struggling with when I talk to other people that have done psychedelics in heavy doses and microdoses. They've reported having these breakthroughs where they're able to zoom out to the bigger picture, kind of recognize this collective intelligence of the distributed cognition that we occupy.
Yeah.
But it is these various systems of superorganisms. So another one is language itself. I think of language as a superorganism. Technology itself is a superorganism that has grown up beside us. And so I try to draw this out in a way that's more hopeful now, but I used to draw graphs that were like, here's human evolution, and then here's language, and then here's technology. You know? That isn't a pretty picture, and I don't think that's the whole picture either, because that kind of, it neglects the complexities of advanced education. It kind of ignores the fact that we're learning how to teach each other at a much higher level, and it kind of ignores the online availability of education as well. More minds are waking up or getting woke as well, but also just waking up to the big picture here. And
yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. The compounding effect of these different, I guess you could call it like emergent phases or emergent layers that are compounding evolution. That's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah, and the more that you look into distributed cognition, the more that you see it, like it really seems that, like, I have to be careful because I don't want to be a negative Nancy here or whatever, but I wonder how hard that is for people to wrestle with, because they're like, I still sometimes experience disillusion, what's it called? There's dissociative identity disorder, which is now a thing in psychology apparently, and I'm pretty sure that's just a symptom of what I'm talking about here, like the fact that we don't know how to contemplate, like we don't know how to contemplate, and we also don't know how to contemplate the fact that we are in a distributed cognition. So when we face these proposals from Sapolsky or from the generalists and the polymaths that are showing us that 95% of the time people are running around on autopilot, that's very disturbing. Like, to me, I've heard multiple psychologists use that number specifically, that 95% of the time humans are running around on autopilot. And yeah, I mean, it really does seem like that's the case. And so a big part of this podcast here is to try and fix that, to make that number a little bit lower and give people more agency.
It's so hard though. I mean, I totally agree. It's like, that would be so valuable. Like, just in your own life, you probably can see the times when you don't have the self-awareness and how things improve when you have it. But trying to propagate it isn't the easiest thing. Yeah.
But you can. It is it's harder for some people than others, I think. I mean, it's obviously subjective, and it probably is very much influenced by culture. I think what Vervaeke is doing is a very good bridge to this, because he has a great conception of the Western paradigms of postmodernism, postmodernity, in a way that's not what Peterson is doing. I should point out, Peterson's conception of postmodernism is very, I would say, ableist. Like, that's probably a good way to use the term ableism there. When he says things like, people might say, oh, the poor thugs, they had it hard growing up. And you don't say that when the psychopaths come knocking down your doors. Like, bruh, like, you just abandon all your psychology for ideology. So there's that.
Oh, man.
It's like, so, I mean, you see how powerful that is, like how easy it is. He is a PhD, one of the most, probably the most famous psychologists in the whole world. Yeah. Probably in not in history, but I mean, he is now shifted back into ideology. He was already ideological to begin with, but it's like the narrative sells, and now he has 8 million subscribers on YouTube, and he has sold out to Daily Wire because
and
they're supplying this.
Oh, I have a really hot take about this, but can we pause, take a break real quick?
Oh, sure, yeah.
We were talking about Jordan Peterson. We were alluding to the concept of audience capture, right?
Yeah,
how
that's the term. Yeah, audience capture.
Yeah, it's such a dangerous phenomenon. Like I run a really small YouTube channel, and I've felt like even at the levels that I'm dealing with, I've felt the gravity of the audience capture. It's like if I publish a video about this topic, I get all these dislikes and not very many views. If I do this topic, ooh, lots of reward, lots of views. I'm like, maybe I should go this direction with my channel. That temptation is there.
And that's the superorganism, that's the algorithm drawing you away from your truest self, right?
Yeah, because I know what my goal is with the channel, and that is not my goal. And it's pulling me away from, as wait a second, I don't think that's the best path for humanity. This is the best path. Wait a second, I'm being gravitated towards the collective, So part of the battle is like, okay, so here's the hot take, right? I did a podcast the other day called Conscious Robotic Agency. So I know that you are skeptical of the no free will perspective, but I'm a pretty strong determinist.
I'm still undecided. So just to clarify really quickly, if I can, when I think about free will, I try to use the term whatever we currently think of as free will, because I don't actually think it exists. I don't think any creatures have it. I think we have what I call deliberate selection as opposed to natural selection. So we have both. Natural selection has continued along its path to create a more deliberate form of selection, which is more based on the individual. Now the individual can begin to direct its evolutionary path quite deliberately. You don't have to call that, you don't really have to think of an agent being there to do that, but it is kind of more deliberate.
I really like that. I think that's true. I would put that under the category of agency, but I think that's a useful way to frame it. I would nest all of that under like a deterministic framework. Like determinism creates like agents, and agents like create this self-determinism. But technically the self-determinism is following the laws of physics, right? I think it's useful to remember how vulnerable we are to determinism, right? So like this audience capture, so it's like there's the metacognition, that's the intentionality, right? You said deliberate selection, right? So within our brains, there's the conscious and the unconscious, and the consciousness can regulate the unconsciousness, but if the consciousness isn't watching, then the unconscious can get captured, right? So that the audience capture, it's going, here's your reward system, here's a dopamine spike. And so if you're not being deliberate, you can get captured, right? And the fascinating thing is there's studies, me and my other friend talked about this on the other podcast, there's studies about teachers, like Jordan Peterson, he's a lecturer, teachers can get captured by their students. So what they did was they did a study where if the students pay attention, then that's a reward. And if the students don't pay attention, that's a punishment. And so the experiment is we're going to pay attention to very specific things. And so what they did was when the teacher moves to the left, we reward the teacher. When the teacher moves to the right, we punish the teacher. And by the end of the lecture, the teacher was like in the corner of the classroom as far left as they could go. Just complete unconscious brainwashing, you know what I mean?
What were the actions that the students were making?
Paying attention.
Just attention? Wow.
Yeah, eye contact, maybe a smile, maybe like good posture. Yeah. And so, and Jordan Peterson, he talks about, he's like, I watch my students, and when I give a lecture, I know when I'm boring, and I know when I'm interesting. And I've been learning for decades how to be interesting. It's like, yes, you have learned how to be interesting, and you've weaponized it to be sensational. You know what I mean?
And he doesn't even realize that's the other thing, because he thinks he's coming from a good place, and he is. That's why I feel so bad about criticizing him, because he's done great works and he's made major improvements in my own life to many degrees.
Yeah, I've benefited from a lot of it, but I just kind of, it pains me to see his trajectory because I disagree with so much of it.
Well, let's hope that he acts as a lesson. Let's hope that he changes for one thing, but if he doesn't, we'll hopefully take it as a lesson I mean, people are making statues of him now. They're making statues.
Whoa! I haven't heard of that. That
They have
sounds
a bust.
wild.
Yeah, there's a bust you can get of Peter.
I think I have seen that. I didn't think of it as like a statue. Is like
Sorry,
I was
I
thinking.
should have said bust. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. It's like a monument. It's like dun, dun,
I
dun,
mean, he
dun,
is
dun.
like he is one of the greatest thinkers that we have living. Because you're a very good thinker doesn't mean that you're right, but he's very, yeah, he has a greater picture and greater grasp of the big picture than I think the large majority of people do.
Oh yeah, he's very synthetic in that he brings a lot of perspectives together. He's like, here's the evolutionary perspective, here's the psychology, here's the neurology or neuroscience, here's the Nietzschean perspective, so I think he's valuable, and I think he's dynamic. I think he's learned how to be interesting, and I think he's been a good influence in the world in attracting a lot of people to think more deeply, to think more inclusively, and to I think he's inspired a lot of interest in philosophy through his dynamic approach to it.
Yeah.
But he's also, inspired a lot of interest in a lot of regressive, dogmatic thinking as of late as well. A lot of fear-based thinking. So he's been a force for good and bad at different times.
It's too laced with religiosity or theology and ideology. It's
Yeah, for
unfortunate
sure.
because he's trying to blend the Christian narrative into it. He's trying to make
Yeah.
all of that, but doesn't necessarily work.
A lot. A lot of. I mean, I have a lot of privilege in not being LGBT. So like his whole like anti-LGBT stuff, like kind of all of that harm, it goes over my head in a way because like it doesn't affect my life. But that's a whole thing that deserves a lot of respect. And it's like, dude, Jordan Peterson, what are you doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, there's people that also, it's kind of juvenile as well. People have accused him of doing what Ben Shapiro does, which is just picking on college students. Like, come on, man. Just have a real debate with, like, more seasoned adult philosophers. If you're going to talk at the level that you're talking, don't just pick fights with kids. But that's not to say that the non-binary LGBTQ community is other kids. There are plenty of people that are adults, but you see what I mean. The contentions right now, I think, are very childish. The debates right now are being conducted in a very childish manner, and in a non-philosophical manner, in most cases. But I don't want to get too much into this, but I'm writing a lot about it in my book, The Diagnostic Default, because it's very relevant. There is a very deep existential defense to be given for transgenderism, or transgenderism, if you want to call that an ism. Again, questioning.
You said there's a lot of what defense?
Existential philosophy underlying identifying how you please in this world. So, quite literally, Jean-Paul Sartre's existence precedes essence. You exist, and you get to choose your essence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's tons of philosophy that kind of undergirds that whole perspective.
Yeah, and then Peterson is just completely ignoring that, I think. But I do see that being, it's going too far in some ways, or it's just not handled like we've handled it in other cultures, because transgenderism, again, questioning that ism, and the LGBTQ, it's just different ways of gender identification. Those have been around for centuries. Like, we've always had that. Native American tribes have had multiple genders.
Like an example of something that I object to, Jordan Peterson would be like, these doctors deserve to be thrown into jail. They're butchering our children. Like, he's like treating like doctors like these moral monsters that must be hunted down. Like, dude, what if like we're talking about like a cancer patient and it's like we're doing heart surgery on a child with a defective heart? It's like, you're butchering these children, these cancer doctors. I just want to note that we are talking about LGBT and your camera transformed into a rainbow. I think the demon is on my side.
Yeah, man, this is another really I mean, the reason these discussions are in debate for so many years is because we don't have an answer to it. You can go wholly deterministic and wholly genetic and say that you must adhere to the gender that you're born with or that you're assigned upon birth. And that can be problematic because we have hermaphroditism, but that's not a very good argument for gender identity. That's just saying there's exceptions to the physiological conformity to your physical form, which goes against existentialism, or is one way to think about existentialism. So, yeah, I mean, we don't know. I'm straight, or cis is the way that it's being called now, which is cool, because straight
there's two
crooked, and I don't want to think that what I am, everybody else is just crooked or whatever. That's not doing the male attracted to female thing.
There's actually two dimensions of analysis here. Like, on a graph, there's there's a coordinate system between two dimensions. You've got your attraction dimension and you've got your identity dimension, right? So cis is on the identity dimension, straight is on the attraction dimension.
Oh, okay. I haven't really. I need to do more of these, the moral compass model or whatever that's.
It's really useful to break things down and visually. Yeah, I try to. One of my I have a blog and a YouTube channel. One of my goals is to really simplify philosophy, making it visceral with images, diagrams. So I'm pretty into that type of a thing.
Heck yeah. Your channel is Transcendent Philosophy?
Yep, Transcendent Philosophy.
Right on. Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out for that because I watched some of your videos as well. Especially your Vervaeke's review of Vervaeke's After Socrates series. It's very well developed and very informative at a layman's level, which is very helpful.
Did you actually watch all of them, or just one of them? Or?
I haven't made it through all of them yet, but I want to, because there are parts of Vervaeke's propositions that I'm still confused about.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that's like you. I very much adhere to the nomenology or whatever, like the naming of the thing, to hold that as a concept in place. So I love the technical language, but I also need to get other interpretations of it to fully understand the depths of what he's getting at.
For sure.
Somebody said, let me read this comment. He said that all I can tell you is that you belong to a group of the greatest sages and saints of all time. I can see Socrates and Plato. I can see Plotinus and Thomas Aquinas, and even the Buddha himself in you. I feel immense gratitude. That's somebody commenting on John Vervaeke's video on reverse engineering the dialectic.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about that too. What I've come to realize is that the most pragmatic occurrences are usually had through disagreement. What I mean to say is that usually the most productive discussions involve disagreement and not so much synthesis. So I don't like coming to this conclusion, but it's really like, and maybe it depends on the context of the discussion points, but I guess I'm saying, you can get carried away trying to find a synthesis, and you might arrive at a bad synthesis because you didn't fight each other enough. And I'm using that strong language because we have to kind of, we really got to get into the nitty gritty about finding exactly the flaws in each other's arguments and try and do so from a place of respect. If we don't do that enough, we risk accommodating other people. We risk making other people feel welcome and respected too much if you can do that kind of thing. So what I'm proposing is a seriously nuanced approach to communication, where we've kind of been doing that here. I've kind of been disagreeing where I can. We actually agree on far more than we disagree on, it seems. So I can only do so much disagreeing. But you see, it's like the more you disagree in a pragmatic form, the more that you can shoot down each other's flaws, that's when you start to really get at a golden nugget of wisdom. And maybe that is a way to arrive at synthesis. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. The technical pathway to synthesis is the thesis and the antithesis. They have to come together, and hopefully they come together in a respectful way that's productive into a synthesis. Right.
Right.
So you got to bring those disagreements together.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, a lot of the podcasts I witness, like the interviewers don't want to offend their interviewees either, so they don't risk really trying to poke holes in their
okay.
Well, that, I mean, I'm trying to put it in this language, like it sounds like poking holes in her. It sounds like you're being attacked. Like my ideas don't attack my ideas because they're mine. Your ideas aren't really your own. Like, again, going back to determinism, it's all distributed cognition. So really, for brains to come to a global collective understanding, we got to be really hashing it out to the max. We really got to be pushing on all of the flaws in our thinking.
Yeah, what you said is absolutely huge. There's a couple things I want to say. There's an interesting question that I think can help put people in the right frame of mind. You can ask people, what would it take to change your mind?
Right.
What would it take to change your mind is a question you can ask. You can also say, how sure of that are you on a scale of 0 to 100? How confident are you 0 to 100? And also, why are you that confident? So there's my I'm aware of psychological studies on these types of questions, where like people, they start out in really dogmatic, like egoistic, like I'm right, you're wrong, tribal epistemology, and then like you ask them these questions, and they start to open up where they're like, well, actually, maybe I'm not that sure, and it's like, oh, well, when you ask me for my reasons, I don't really have that good of reasons, so I'm not even, like, they'll drop their confidence level as you ask more questions, but you have to get them into that open mode. If you start attacking them, they start to double down, like, no, I'm definitely right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think that is huge, to kind of get into an exploratory mode. With questions, put you into this exploration mode. Whereas, that's one way to go.
Question. You said,
I
are you about that on a scale of 1 to 10? And then there was another one?
Yeah, I had 3 questions. What would it take to change your mind?
Oh, right.
How confident are you? And then why are you that confident? What's your evidence? What's your logic? What's behind that? And so people will start to be much more flexible when you start to dig deeper with questions. But I think part of it is you have to make them feel like we're on a team, right? It's this oxytocin. Are we on a team? Right. Are you my tribe, or are you the enemy? Is this combative, or is this teamwork? Right? And so I view dialectic as a teamwork conversation, where it's like Socrates. He'd go into the marketplace and he'd talk to his fellow, constituents. He'd be like, hey, we're on a team. Let's discover the truth together. What do you think justice is? Well, let me poke some holes. Let's see if we can rectify our definition of justice. Let's explore justice together through iterating questions. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was teamwork to discover truth, and it was very productive, right?
Right. The way I think about this is that the ultimate context that I go into these discussions with people is that, indeed, these ideas are not my own, but I have the instinct to take credit for them, because some part of me that I consider myself, which, again, you can debate what that means, what self means, what me means.
Yeah.
But there is some part of you that wants to take pride or self-esteem in the fact that you spent 10 hours working on a specific philosophical proposition. So, I mean, you have scientists that spend 10 years doing this as their career, and then you start poking holes in their propositions and perspectives. Yeah. So I think of this as dialectic into diabetos, maybe?
Dialogos?
No, debatos.
Diabetos. Interesting. What do you...
Yeah, I don't know if that's a Greek word or whatever. I'm just kind of making things up, but
it's fine. I don't care if people invent words. I'm just trying to figure out what you mean by that.
So debates, a lot of times that we talk about debates. Sorry, I'm playing with my dog right now. We get into, it's kind of like fight. Like it's just one side wants to be right and the other side wants to be right, and whoever does that better Whoever communicates their idea with more passion, vigor, and charisma, or logical precision, is the one that is the victor. And so that's the wrong way to do debate. The benefit of debate is that you get the pragmatism, you get the, you can really start poking holes in flawed thinking. Like I don't think that you get as effective hole poking in other forms of communication like dialectic as you do with debate. We just do debate wrong. But again, we could just be interpreting all these D-based words from different angles, and that must get lost in those definitions too.
So are you trying to say that you want to synthesize aspects of, like, debate has some, like, some of the combative element of debate is productive, some of the cooperative element of dialectic is productive, and we want to bring those together?
Yeah, although I should emphasize, like what I was saying before with the whole, my ideas are separate from me. When I think of debate and productive, pragmatic debate, like there is a mode that we can enter into where we're literally just throwing propositions at each other, and we take no emotional connection to those when other people shut them down. So I'm talking about like two people throwing as many propositions as they can as fast as possible, and finding the flaws in each as fast as possible with no emotional attachment whatsoever to any of those propositions being shot down. That's what we should be doing with debate, but we have emotions attached, and we have ideology and tribalism attached and all this.
Yes.
And so I think what we're doing with dialectic, and when we get into all these different forms of polite communication, we're kind of trying to get around that fact that we can't just speak out in the ether. Like, here's an idea, this idea is here, it's not here, this idea is now talking with this idea, which is also not attached to your brain, and they are now talking, you know what I mean? Like, this is kind of allowing the superorganism to communicate with humans being a vessel for universal understanding. And now I sound like a hippie. So, but I mean, I really also like thinking that way, so, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree that, sometimes the dialectic can be too cooperative, or it just devolves into a discussion, patting each other on the shoulder, and it's not productive for... You want to see the thesis and the antithesis. They need to fight each other so you can see where it leads. And if they're not fighting, you can't, like, grow into the synthesis, right?
Yeah, if they're not in contention enough, or if they're not debated to a high enough degree, you're not really going to get anywhere.
Yeah, so why do you just keep agreeing with me, man? What the heck?
Well, I was going to say, I'd like to try and implement this mode of discussion going forward, but I also very much think that we have to, like, get to know each other better. Like, if you're going to implement this with anyone, they have to be, you have to know them very well, and it's got to be very comfortable, because, it's so easy to be attached to our ideas.
I agree with that.
That being said, so we talked about the limits of dialectic and dialogos. What about the limits of metaphor? This is also another huge abstract question, and it'll be my last. When I think of metaphor and allegory, just to give you an example, one of my favorite channels, I shouldn't mention the channel name, but I'll tell you after this. It's because it's one of the best channels I've ever seen, and is my favorite because of that. But they had a guest on talking about pragmatic philosophy, or philanthropy, and pragmatic philosophy and social philosophy. And she spent basically an hour and a half talking about how society is like a dragon, and how it's kind of having indigestion, and how the processes of society are like a dragon having indigestion. And long, beautiful metaphor, very accurate, very apt, but again, I gained nothing from that. Like, I mean, it made me kind of relate to the problem better, but I didn't get anything, no actionable message at all from that. But it's like how we get swept away. Like, even some of the best YouTubers and best interviewers can let the conversation go in that direction, because they're kind of being swept away by what's that. It's like another way to put this is, like, we're really getting at something. We're really uncovering something here. Like, we're finally getting it. But what you're getting at is just a better metaphor that's kind of just describing certain aspects of what you're really trying to get at.
Do you think metaphor is the problem, or is a problem orientation the problem?
Well, I think of it as the limits of metaphor. So all metaphors are necessarily missing the mark. All metaphors necessarily fall short of what they're trying to describe. The same thing. So look at music and poetry, for example. They're never 100% accurate, but they are very, very effective at making us feel connected and involved in this world. And connected and involved to the subject matter that's being described.
I'm trying to think of a. Can you think of can you give us a metaphor that connects to a problem solution paradigm? Where it's like an example that we can dissect?
Well, so the dragon metaphor that I was describing earlier, so if I recall, I'm trying to remember, but my brain deleted a lot of that. So she described it like the dragon is all-consuming. It's always consuming society, and it's consuming whatever materials it can, and it gets indigestion and it gets constipated. And she talked a lot about constipation too, which was really. But I was like, this is getting really, really weird. But she was very accurate. Like she was showing how. This dragon has kind of been in existence over time, and she gave various aspects, like this is the dragon hoarding the wealth, this is the dragon engorging itself, and kind of metaphors around the 7 deadly sins. You could just use those. The 7 deadly sins are metaphors for the main struggles that humans face, I guess you could say.
Daniel Schmattenberger has a metaphor, like the monstrous version of capitalism. When capitalism goes bad, I forget the name of the metaphor, like a mythological monster. But yeah, okay. So if the metaphor if the metaphor is accurate enough, then maybe the metaphor can lead you to a solution. But are you saying that the metaphor is so inaccurate that it can never lead you to a solution? Is that kind of your concern?
I haven't thought about that. My concern is more so that we get swept away by metaphor because it sounds like we're getting at something, but it can actually be...
So it's an illusion of philosophic progress?
Yeah, that's right.
It's like false
really, that's
progress.
exactly it. Yeah, it's like I was describing it. Like it really feels like we're getting somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, now that's what it is. That's what we're getting at. But really, you're just kind of saying that's sort of what it's like, or this is something that's similar to that. But it's based on So the reason, quite literally, the reason that we can't think outside of nature. Like we can't transcend the universe to get an all-encompassing universal metaphor or description that is wholly accurate. So we're I should say a description that's wholly accurate. So we're reduced to metaphor. We're reduced to only using our human interpretation and various examples. The same thing is true with music and just art and all the creative expressions, which is kind of a sad conclusion to come to begin with. But it can get better depending on how you look at it. We're always borrowing from our past experiences, and we're always remixing reality, basically.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
work like that, basically.
In a very if you take metaphor and you blow it up into a very, very meta perspective, almost everything is metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Because the map is not the territory, our math is not reality, our models are not exactly reality, we're constantly approximating reality, but never exact. And so it's these approximations are metaphors for the thing beneath it. Right. But what you're talking about seems to be, I don't know. I think to improve upon if the problem is the illusion of progress, I think you need to tether it to results. You need to tether it to metrics. Is there a measurable solution? What can we measure that we get out of this? Right. That type of metrics, and that's the way to measure if you've actually progressed. Right.
Right, and then that kind of takes away the power and the beauty, or the truth, the goodness, and the beauty in the metaphor when you go too reductionist and too data-driven with it. And so we have kind of this contention as well. For instance, have you ever seen scientific poetry? you ever read a poem about math or a poem that's describing a scientific concept? They do exist. But when you go to, and some of them are really good, but when you go to read them, it's like, it's really good, but it doesn't work. And I've tried writing it myself. Like, I've tried doing this diligently. I've really tried writing poetry that describes the physics of nature, and at some point you just kind of like get off track and start describing the world as physicalists. Like, it's kind of impossible not to. So maybe there's an unresolved contention there. Who knows? But it may be resolved. It can't be resolved though.
You probably need a philosophy of art. Like, you've got to marry your physicalism to a philosophy of art in order to make it beautiful.
Yeah, Michael Sugru has a lot to say about that. This lecturer from the 80s is a very, very efficient and effective philosophical lecturer.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. He's got he's got that like blue wall that he films in front of, right?
Yeah, with like the cool little rectangle frames. Yeah, with the VHS recordings.
I love it.
Yeah, I watched that whole series. Very, very good. We also don't like, that's Vervaeke level philosophy. We don't really see that either. David Hughes also has a good series on that too, or on religiosity basically, and the history of philosophy.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, these are great discussions. I probably raised more questions than answers here, but we're getting the discussion points going, and I think that this is how these kind of polymathic-based podcasts kind of tend to go. We spend a few episodes getting the major ideas out, and then really start getting into the nitty-gritty, because we're talking in the abstract, and very much so. I've definitely been talking in the abstract to the extreme here, and I want to make it more concrete and more applicable and actionable. So I think we made some good steps here.
Yeah, man, it was great. Yeah, great cooperative dialectic.
Heck yeah. Alrighty then. Well, I appreciate you and I appreciate everyone for watching. Please check out Seth's channel, Transcendent Philosophy, and also check out John Vervaeke's After Socrates series and Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And also, if you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up here in the comments, or check out my own series that are examining these various philosophical explorations. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.